Hello, chat. Hello, fair people of the internet. Hello, those of you who have already joined us. We have Grumpy Old Slan, Halakar, Mage's Musings, and AB Mark II. They're in chat. All said hello so far. Boo indeed. And I'm joined, as you can see, by Elfbait. Hello, Elfbait.
Hello, folks.
I don't think we're going to be having Saxius tonight. I think he's otherwise occupied. And Omanal hasn't said anything about, has he, tonight, about whether he's going to be popping in? He's usually at work around this sort of time, isn't he?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, he jumps in a little bit.
I'm not quite sure I understand how his work works, though. But
no. But for the time being, you're stuck with us too. So what? It seems that a lot of people at the moment, because it's that time of year, it's 12 days until Halloween, which is a big thing for you people in America, and is a minor annoyance for us here in the UK. People seem to be talking about horror gaming quite a lot. I've seen on a few people's streams where they've been bringing up things like Ravenloft and other things like that. So I thought we'd have a chat about it, seeing as far as I'm concerned, horror gaming is something I'd like to do all year round. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's Halloween or not. I enjoy a good horror game. Here we go. Started already. Here he is. No, you can't have any.
Do we already have bots?
No bots. Well, it might be a bot. It's Omanal demanding sweeties from us.
Already,
yes. One thing I am going to say, Omanal, is don't take sweet things from strange men. There's a bit of advice for life. Hello, Adam. Hello, Doof. No cost. Oh, well, I haven't got. Actually, I have got a suitable T-shirt on tonight for horror gaming. Beware the smiling dungeon master.
Here, I'll assume a costume as well, so just to be sure. Doesn't want to fit over my my headset, but there we
go. Yeah, well, mine's just a regular everyday T-shirt, but
it certainly fits a lot better than this. But no, it's in my basement of many things.
Yes, you have a very interesting basement there. Is it haunted? Do things go rattle in the night?
You know, if I were the sort of person who believed in things like that, I would imagine probably, because this house in this part of the country is so old, as far as this country goes. You know,
I'm glad you added that clarifier, because I was about to dive in and say nothing in America is old.
While technically true, there is old stuff here. It's just not as old.
Yeah,
it's like but no, I remember visiting my brother in Maine one winter, dead of winter in Maine, and just walking around this small town that's literally called Old Town, Maine, and everything there is just ancient as far as America goes. And I mean, there's some new construction, but all the houses are just old Victorian style ones that are just looming in the darkness, and you just know that there's ghosts everywhere if they're around there. Ghosts.
Ghosts. Anyhow, hello, Andrew. Halloween, the Hershey's holiday in the US. I'm guessing your chocolate companies make a lot of money at that time of year. And I think Halakar's made a very good point here. Yeah, it would be a bigger thing over here if yeah, if we had that, I think that would be well worth our time joining in. But what we have here is gangs of 6, 7, and 8-year-old kids knocking on your door for about 3 hours, waving buckets at you to expecting you to put cash in there or sweets in there. And that goes on for about 2 or 3 hours. And then they all go and eat them all and are sick on their parents' kitchen floors. And that's pretty much it.
My house and family have always been big on Halloween. It's actually our favorite holiday. So
it's not really classed much as a holiday here. I have been to Halloween parties. I have, my kids did. I did trick-or-treating when I was little. My kids did trick-or-treating for a little while, but then soon lost interest. I did have a load of friends over once for a game of Ravenloft on Halloween. That was mildly amusing. We just got drunk and ate curry, but that's all part of having a weekend D&D game, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, we're here to talk about Halloween gaming, horror gaming. Now, there are clearly several systems that can be used for horror gaming, and I will admit here the only one I've ever played a proper horror game in is Call of Cthulhu, and I do already have alcohol here to drink whenever I mention Call of Cthulhu.
I've played a few different horror games in my time, but and I do like to play them pretty much year round. So
I just want to flag up. Hello, Antonio. It's the first time I've seen you on one of my streams. Antonio is a local, even though his name, he is Italian, but he lives near me. But he's the first DM I played with when I came back to the hobby around 2012. It was his game that I joined. So welcome, Antonio. Welcome. And yes, I do remember the Arkham Witches, and we never finished that scenario. I still don't know what the solution is. We were just roaming around a Salem-like town of that sort of era, being useless. So, hello, Antonio. Good to see you. No, I have actually got a couple of cans of Guinness in the fridge, Major's Musings, just for tonight's purposes. I can say hello to a few more people. Saxius is lurking in chat, and Larissa's here. It's very nice to have 13 people watching, and we've not actually made any sense at all yet. Maybe that's because
lurking Vikings.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason why we are already wildly off topic is because Saxius is not here. He is in chat, and he can't bring us into line from chat. So, tough titty poos. Right. So, what other horror games have you played, Elfbite?
The first one I ever played was Chill.
Right.
That one was the old first edition of that in the box set. Back in the glorious days of box sets, but also Beyond the Supernatural by Palladium. I've played the second edition of Chill, and then I've also played Beyond the Supernatural. I mentioned that Dark Conspiracy by GDW, sort of a weird everything goes horror game where you have the supernatural and the paranormal and UFOs and everything like that. I played obviously the White Wolf stuff, which I don't know. It's hard to categorize that as horror, but I mean, it has all the horror monsters. I mean, I've done horror D&D too. I mean, running my games, I tend to sneak horror themes in all throughout a campaign.
I do. Yeah, I try to. Yeah.
It's very hard for me. I have to fight to shift into Lovecraft country every time I'm running something.
So it's a bit sad that I've only played Cthulhu type. I've only played various versions of the Cthulhu rules. I've never seen a Palladium book. I've never heard of Chill. So I need to get off my backside and start looking at some of these other books. I have heard I have heard of Beyond the Supernatural, but only because I've heard it being discussed online. You right, DM James? Hello, David
There's
Serrano.
another one that actually came out a year before Vampire the Masquerade did, and that was a game called Nightlife, which was a kind of the same idea, but Nightlife just hit the ground running with any and every kind of supernatural paranormal thing that you can think of, all existing in New York City. So it was almost like it was an indie game, pretty cool book, but yeah, it was neat.
I've played in a few systems that I'm not entirely sure what systems were. Antonio, who's in chat, has run a few other horror type games for us. I know there was one based on Alien that he ran for a couple of sessions, and there was one called The Fear something or other. It was set. We were all in an asylum. I can't remember what the name of the system was, but that was a good fun game. Really, really enjoyable game.
If we're counting Alien, I have played not the new Alien game, but way back in the day, I actually ran an Alien campaign using homebrew off of the West End Games Star Wars system. So that's another one, I guess.
I've never tried. I've made a GURPS character. Never tried to play GURPS. I have heard it's fairly rough to play.
I have a friend who swears by it, but the only thing I ever found good about GURPS is their source books for settings are really good. If just for just the information that's in there, like they have some really good historical settings books, and they managed to get a few settings books based on sci-fi literature, fantasy literature. So those are always good. One thing I really liked about their mythological setting books was that they would have blurbs on how to play the mythology as history, like what like these are what centaurs would be like in a historical sense, and where they might have come from.
So that sort of thing. But yeah, I'd find that sort of thing interesting. But I didn't find the mechanics interesting from what I read. And character creation took all day, which turned me off straight away. Anyway, let's go on to the topic of horror games. How do you get them to work, and how and what is a horror game? For me, a horror game has to have atmosphere. Now, it helps to have a scenario to help generate atmosphere, and it helps if the person running the game is able to focus on the scenario and not have to worry about mechanics, because obviously mechanics can take you out of the moment. And key to running a horror game, I think, is keeping mechanics discussions to an absolute minimum. Something I have found, and this is a bit of feedback from my the game that I ran at the weekend. One of the players, I did mention it in the video I did about Call of Cthulhu the other day. One of the players said afterwards that he wasn't sure how the game would play without any sort of visual reference. He wasn't used to running entirely theatre of the mind. He was used to running either on a board or on Roll20 D&D type games for his group. And he said afterwards how pleasantly surprised he was at how well a horror game translated to running purely theatre of the mind through Discord, because it allowed the imagination to take over. Nobody was distracted by moving tokens around a map. All the images were conjured in the mind. So in that sense, I think horror games play better if you've got the right type of group.
Oh yeah.
In an online setting. Because one other thing about online play is everyone concentrates just that little bit more to hear voices. And people tend to be respectful let other people speak. So the game plays that little bit more slowly, but that slower pace is something that is very, very useful for generating atmosphere.
Yeah, I'd agree on that. I think there's a sense of it's easier to get that feeling of isolation that's necessary for a
Yeah,
good horror game too when you're playing online, because everybody's alone usually in a room, or at least with minimal crowd around them,
yeah,
around a table with a bunch of people and crinkling chip bags and
of course.
slurping drinks and stuff. It's a lot harder to kind of get into that immersion.
Of course it is. Yeah, yeah. Of course, I mean, obviously, you need to have a half decent DM, or you need to have a good group of players who are willing to invest themselves in the characters. And um, and I when I've run those two recent Call of Cthulhu games, I'm going to say again, I think I was lucky with the groups who were playing it, because it felt like people were invested. People got into their characters really, really well. Now, whether that's the strength of the scenario or as well, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's the strength of the scenario helped as well. Plus the whole setup of it having amnesia at the start, so they were learning about their characters as the adventure went on, and they were never beholden to mechanics, because they didn't have a complete character sheet in front of them. They were filling it in as they went along. That all really, we go dark.
Speaking of horror,
But I think all of those sort of things really helped. So having a good scenario at your disposal, good group of players, play online, purely theatre of the mind, I think horror can really, really, really work. And I've just seen this point come up from Mage's Musings. You can invest yourself in the characters, I think, more if you can relate to them. So the idea in that particular game of everyone playing a very normal team of people working for a low budget TV show with no special abilities at all, it's easier to invest yourself in a character if it feels relatable.
and one of the key things to a good horror story, like I mentioned earlier, was just a moment ago, was the isolation. But the other thing is vulnerability.
Of
Normal
course,
people tend to be
I was going
vulnerable.
to come to that. Yeah,
Yeah, as I say, that's why Alien is horror and Aliens is horror action, or more sci-fi action.
yeah.
There's not much. I mean, there are horrific things, but I would pause to call it actual horror. The second one, but they're both great movies, but they're very different. And I definitely have had bad experiences with horror players, like people who just wanted to cheese their way through the game. That's ultimately kind of what killed Chill for my gaming group back in the day.
And when you get, say, good players with characters they can get into, that they can relate to, and they manage to sort of properly portray that desperate survival aspect as well, that heightens the vulnerability, heightens the sense of them being fragile, being up against something that they really can't control, and that sort of being unable to control the surroundings and the threat is part of getting horror. It's part of getting horror right, and that's one of the reasons why I'm going to come to. I want to get this out of the way early. Much as I love the adventure Ravenloft, I don't think D&D does horror at all. I know people like the Ravenloft setting, but the whole point of D&D is, certainly older versions of D&D, you are more fragile, but through all versions of D&D, you are becoming a hero. You are becoming more and more powerful. You're becoming more and more capable of taking on whatever you're up against as you go on. And horror really should be the reverse of that.
Yeah. I mean, even like I said, even in those older editions where you're vulnerable, you're still fighters and wizards and clerics, and it's kind of like watching 13th Warrior, for example. Yes, there was some spooky, creepy stuff in 13th Warrior, but it wasn't horrific and it wasn't really horror. I mean, it was just creepy and atmospheric. Yeah, I know. I run, like I mentioned, run a lot of horror stuff in D&D now and again. Not just undead monsters, but like I've done I've done cannibals in the woods. Like misshapen cannibals in the woods before. Kind of like Wrong Turn or Hills Have Eyes kind of encounters.
But yeah, I mean, you can have horror-like encounters, and you can have your players on the edge of their seats. But I think with them knowing that they've got a wizard who can conjure fire at the fingertips, or they've got
a cleric who can turn undead,
yeah, or a cleric who can cure diseases, or what have you, or a fighter who's a badass with his magical blade and all that sort of stuff. It lessens the impact somewhat.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like I mentioned Beyond the Supernatural. It's a Palladium game, but it is a Palladium game. So you come out of that game so well equipped, and so well skilled and everything. Your characters are built as paranormal investigators. Now, one of the nice things they did in that game, though, is they did create bystander rules where they had a subset of rules where you could just play normal people, which was fun. But yeah, it's when you're playing a bunch of FBI agents out there hunting down the supernatural, that's not as creepy as the guy from the video store walking home at night and having to run into something.
I mean, I suppose you could using the 0 level character rules in D&D have pull off the horror style, I think, a lot more effectively.
Yeah.
If all the characters are armor class 10 carrying nothing better than a dagger, and they know that if anything hits them they're dead, then yes, they're going to be more careful. And part of playing a horror game is ensuring the characters play carefully, play cautiously, because the moment they go gung-ho, you lose a lot of the tension.
Yeah.
And chat have been chatting away very, very happily while we've been completely ignoring them. So I'm going to bring up a few chats while my daughter shouts in the background. I see. I see that. I mean, when the Arkham game that Antonio mentioned earlier, we were using Cthulhu Dark. But yeah, the very, very simple, very stripped down version of Call of Cthulhu, and it worked absolutely beautifully. I don't remember rolling hardly any dice in that game.
I've gone whole sessions of Call of Cthulhu without really ever having to roll dice, except for maybe a sanity check or something. Yeah. Very few skill checks. Of course, in a game like that, I'm more inclined to let the players role play a lot of the fact-finding, investigation, interviews with people, because if they're gonna go through all of that and they're gonna give you good arguments and they're gonna engage with your NPCs, then why reduce it to die rolls unless it's really super critical and there's actually some opposition. But having a conversation with the front desk lady at the museum, unless she's got something to hide, why bog it down with die rolls? So.
But I mean, when I run Call of Cthulhu, I do call for quite a lot of dice rolling, because I like using them to affect the direction of the story. And yes, I said the story word.
I think that applies in Cthulhu, though. Yeah. Call of Cthulhu tends to be what a lot of people would call railroad, even though it's more of a linear plot. But
yeah, but it's not quite a railroad. Some of them are, but I mean, a true railroad adventure is one where outcomes are pretty much determined.
Oh yeah,
and I would say in Call of Cthulhu, the outcome is very rarely predetermined.
That's why I distinguish saying it was more of a linear plot.
Yeah, yes.
It's you start someplace and you've got a place you're trying to get, whether that's stop the boogity or
Yeah.
whatever, it's, you've got a goal. Unlike D&D, where it's like, I'm going to go explore this place.
What I mean, what? Yes, yeah. But one thing, I mean, that forget me not scenario I was using. One of the reasons, and some of you may have watched the review and the revisit. I don't care. I know a lot of people haven't because it still doesn't get all that many hits.
I did.
Thank you. But one of the best things about that scenario, quite simply, is that it gives you a town with a list of NPCs. It gives you a list of things that you can find and things you can learn. And there is actually a very simple solution, which is realize you've been infested by something otherworldly. Realize that medicine is not going to help you. And then locate a book detailing the ritual that you need to survive. Carry out that ritual.
Yeah.
That can be done very, very quickly. You never need to meet the bad guy in that adventure. One of my groups never did. But along the way, I've run it 3 times now, and we've had 3 very, very different stories coming out of that adventure, which shows just how flexible and how different approaches can work with it. I had one group that was very, very much focused on trying to eject the spawn from their body by they went to the local diner and asked for raw beef burgers because they wanted to be sick. That sort of thing, because they were trying to get their body just to throw up and get diarrhea, all that sort of stuff, to try and flush everything out.
That's a long shot. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm sorry. It's just thinking, I'm like, I've eaten raw beef and it didn't make me sick.
If it's a still frozen fast food hamburger, it's probably.
But I'm just saying. I'm just saying. It's like it's not. It's not going to make you sick fast enough either. But I also have a bad reputation of having an ironclad stomach and not getting sick.
Fair enough. My second group who went through it discovered that they chose not to go to bed when they got to the hotel. Went through everything that was in their rooms, found out where they'd been, and went straight to the spooky house that's supposed to really be the end of the scenario. And they went straight there and thus learned a lot straight away and lost a lot of sanity straight away. But then because they'd found the sort of end of scenario stuff, when they met the bad guy, they knew it was the bad guy immediately because they'd already seen them on video. And you're only meant to find that out at the very end. So
if I was playing that, I think I'd just go to the drugstore and get some syrup of ipecac.
I have no idea what that is. No idea.
It's a vomit-inducing chemical, over-the-counter medicine that you can get for making yourself puke.
One thing that every group did was try and go down the medical route, which is something logically that the characters would do, but it's something that the module writer probably didn't put quite enough in there to support. Because I guess the assumption when you're playing Call of Cthulhu is you're going to assume that medicine isn't going to help. But none of my groups ever assumed that medicine wasn't going to help. They tried something physical, something medical first.
Yeah.
But it was a great adventure, great adventure, and
sounds like it.
Yeah, it's proper dirty, proper horrible. Yes. Trust me, 3 large McDonald's fries will clean out your system. Omanal knows.
Yeah, probably out the back door as opposed to up and out.
Well, my group were trying to get it flushed out the back door.
It would not occur to me to like I said, the first thing that was my thought would have been just go syrup of ipecac, but that's weird. But
and just try to spew.
Exactly.
So, in terms of a favorite horror system of all the ones you've played, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, it's got to be Call of Cthulhu. Um, and it's so weird. I feel so bad because I, I could have been playing that game for decades, and I avoided it because growing up in the 80s and coming up through the 90s and stuff, anytime you would talk to somebody in the local stores and local community about Call of Cthulhu, all they wanted to do was just go on about, oh yeah, everybody dies, or I killed all my players, everybody went insane. I'm like, that sounds like great fun. You know? And they would just they would reduce it down to that stereotypical playstyle, which didn't appeal to me. It wasn't until
No.
actually I started watching Seth Krakowski's videos when he started doing them that I'm like, oh, okay. And he even goes into that because he even addresses some of that stuff. He's like, there are rules in there for healing, not fast healing, obviously, like for
Yeah.
magic. There's rules in there for getting over the sanity. If you're not, it's a very well-rounded system. And since starting to play it, I have had no characters die. So maybe I'm running it wrong, and I've only had one character come close to going insane, and instead of going insane, she retired her character from play a bit to go get some help, get some rest.
Were you playing more of a campaign style of game though, rather than
Yes.
one shot? Yes.
Yeah.
But that is the key difference.
Well, that, and also a good chunk of the characters in my campaign were war vets, so they're immune to a lot of the non-supernatural horror
Yeah.
by the rules in Call of Cthulhu. So,
I mean, the published campaigns in Call of Cthulhu, there's usually quite a lot of build up at the start of them, and you can play 3, 4, 5 sessions before you have even a risk of fighting something, or you might only lose 1 or 2 sanity points over those initial sessions. The whole idea, it's all scene setting, it's all finding things out. It's a gentle sort of lead up.
yeah.
I will say I have played mostly one shots, which tend to be a lot more lethal, which might be where some of the reputation comes.
I think a lot of it is kind of the same problem you have with any role-playing game. You've got good and bad GMs too, and you've got some GMs who go into it, and that's where they have their fun. That's it's how they get off, right? It's just ruin, I killed you all, haha, the adversarial DM kind of a thing. And I have a feeling there's a lot of those. And of course, if you're only going by the people you can talk to in the community, because we're talking about pre-internet, it's like your community is the comic shop. That's fair.
No, I do think to run a good horror game, you do have to have a bit of a vicious streak as a DM, but you've got to know where to rein it in.
I think my most successful was running the Alien game that I talked about, when even with the characters playing Marines, I managed to get everybody all the players actually enough on edge to where they ended up fragging their lieutenant when he came around the corner because they were convinced that he was some sort of alien monster because the way I built it up. So yeah, if you can get that build up, then you can, it's definitely good. Yeah.
I will say now that the reason why Mage's Musings character died was that he was the last one to leave the chamber when the Great Old One was approaching, and he got a full visual view of Ihort, which is a 1d20 sanity loss. He failed the sanity check, and the sanity loss rolled a natural 20.
D20 sanity loss. That's
a D20
hardcore.
Lost 20. Yes, he sacrificed his sanity to record the monster. He was videoing the monster.
Yeah.
And then in the car, I think it was the car park of the bar or the diner afterwards, he accidentally cut himself. And if you cut yourself in the game, what you're infested with spews out and you die. And he cut himself and spent 5 minutes laughing and howling and shrieking about how funny it was that he was dying, because he was down to one sanity point at this point, gibbering on the floor like a lunatic.
Yeah, I think that's actually, speaking of one shots versus campaign, that's one of the smartest moves they made when they wrote the Alien RPG. The new one is they have the cinematic mode, which is geared towards just one-offs, and even has a different play style than the campaign. So, but it's all in the main rules.
And yes, he did do that in an insane rage. He used his phone with the footage on it as a club to try and beat off a nurse that was trying to help him. So, yeah, it was, as I say, it was a one shot. Those sort of things are meant to happen. And
yeah, I've had my characters in my games get scared and actually run into sanity loss, but nobody's ever gone insane. And the only character who ever actually died sacrificed himself to blow up a bunch of cultists that were chasing the rest of the investigators. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's sort of that's almost heroic sort of horror.
Yeah, he wanted to change characters, so he's like, "Can I have my character go out in a bang?" I'm like, "Oh, cool."
In a lot of horror, though, there is someone who will sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, the guy standing there with the Molotov, already drenched in gas. Go, I'll hold him off. It doesn't work, but he's still sacrificed.
So, what was I was trying to think what the next point I was going to make was.
I think we were only on point 2.
All right. I do want to mention. I've been talking about streaming an online game to YouTube. Obviously, I haven't had the take up I was hoping for it. I've got 2 players for it at the moment. But so what I'm going to do, what I plan to do this Sunday, hopefully, if I can get a few more to join as a result of this, is run a Call of Cthulhu one shot in my Discord that won't be streamed online. It's just going to be a 4-hour scenario, which will start and end within those 4 hours. So if anyone wants to play, just join the Discord, get in there, and we'll be playing something from that book.
I'm still here. I just need to step off cam for a second.
No problem at all. So if anyone in chat wants to join in, just let me know. Just let me know in Discord. It's not a particularly horrific scenario, but I think it's quite a good one. It's quite an interesting one. So see how you get on. It is lethal. I'm planning to start at about 6 o'clock and finish about 10 o'clock UK time. So AB, if you can make that time, you're more than welcome to join in. 2 potential players at the moment. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. UK time, Andrew. Got to finish by about 10 p.m. because the wife needs to be up for work the next day. So can't go on too late. So if you want to play, you're more than welcome to come in and join. Anywho, do you have any favorite horror scenarios that you've played?
Most of what I do is homebrew, like everything else. I think the one that, so a couple things in my, since I started running Call of Cthulhu that I've really enjoyed. I had our very first game was done around the Christmas holidays, so it's actually become tradition with my group that we kick off our newest run of Call of Cthulhu around Christmas instead of Halloween. And so far, for the first 2 years we've done that, it's always involved the same NPC setting things up. So the players are really starting to get suspicious of this NPC, even though he has nothing to do with the horror they run into. The first one I ran was like my kind of dipping my toe into running Call of Cthulhu for the first time. We had such a good time. It was the four PCs had been invited to a mountain cabin to celebrate Christmas with their friend who had just got done refurbishing it. So him and his girlfriend were there. And his girlfriend was a little odd, but she gave everybody really fancy gifts. And then over the course of the kind of, they were going to be there, before and then through Christmas and stuff like that. So there was this kind of this buildup as they started hearing noises around the cabin and noises off in the countryside, and it culminated with face off against a mummified snake person coming down the chimney with the host's girlfriend half swallowed down its gullet, and then my wife's character, who had been given a statue of Yig for as a Christmas gift by the host's girlfriend, runs up and starts stabbing the snake mummy with the statue of Yig, and it actually ended up being the key to defeating it, because it was a real statue with real power to it. But it was fun. Just the setup of, I like the mundane setups that lead to something. It's one of the things I've often kind of wondered about Call of Cthulhu is so many of the scenarios, the players go into it expecting horror, and you're always hearing from somebody that there's something, and you're going to go investigate the spooky house, or you're sent to do a thing. And I think one of the best plays of a scenario, an actual published scenario, I heard this Skrzykowski again, he's talking about how he ran Deadlight in the middle of another adventure while the players were on their way to another scenario. And if you can get that kind of stuff into a horror game, I think it goes extra far in establishing that spookiness. But yeah, that first game was really nice. Yeah, it's a good scenario, but it's even mentioned in another adventure as something to run on the way there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I think if you can get the players to not know where the horror is coming from, then it's an extra win. You can get it just makes it all the better. I
think one of the reasons why Forget Me Not works so well is because of that a really mundane opening. Okay, it's amnesia. You're suffering from amnesia, but you've just had a car crash and you all had bumps on the head, and you call a tow truck to get you back to the town of Clio, and you've got motel rooms for the night. It's just, there's no go and investigate the spooky house until you find out through searching through your stuff that you had come to town to investigate a spooky house. And that's when it starts going horribly wrong. Yeah. But the first 2 hours or so are just completely mundane, just trying to find out who they are, test their wounds.
The one I ran that really had them kind of off guard and kind of looking to see where the horror was coming from was the one I mentioned before, with sort of the salt, where I made salt scary. And because it starts with them on a train to Arkham, and they're going to Miskatonic to meet with faculty there, and the train gets interrupted because the rain has compromised one of the trestle bridges, and so they have to get off the train. So the players are at that point, they're like, oh, this is where the adventure starts. This is where it all starts, right? We've been diverted from our normal path. Now, it's the variation of the breaking down on the side of the road and having to go into the spooky house, right? So they're at the train station, they get off the train, they have to find a hotel. So then when I was running it, then they could only get a place at a small bed and breakfast. And then they're like, oh, well, this must be where the horror is coming from. And then I described a chance encounter with this stinky old, kind of skeevy looking guest at the thing. Oh, this must be where the horror is coming from. And then the next morning he's all cleaned up, and then they offer him he offers them a ride, and they're like, oh, this must be where the horror is coming from. Yeah. And he's just this pig farmer who's doing deliveries. Like, I can get you around that bridge, no problem. You just come with me and I'll get you. And they're like, oh, he's going to take us into the backwoods and kill us. And it's when they stop in this small town along the way for him to go into the local gas station / cafe there, that to take an order from one of his clients on his rounds, that the adventure starts. And it starts with him falling out of the back room, withered, encrusted with salt, and half alive. And they're like, what the hell?
You've had that long mundane build up
with them looking for death behind every corner. Like, this must be it. No, this is it. And it ended with them running from some horrible ancient spirit that could like make they basically had tendrils of salt that crept out of the salt marsh up there and was like getting all over everything and could turn people into zombies. And at one point they're having a standoff against these zombies from the top of a bank. And then they're trying to make an escape down this long road with the marsh on either side of them and not knowing what was going to come out of it. And then they ended up at a co-op and they blew it up with a tractor.
So that's sort of the sudden sort of shock type of horror. I tend to like this sort of the impending doom one, where they're getting more and more panicky and more nervous as time goes on, because they think that time's against them and things get desperate. But I'm just going to say, imagine this series of posts read in a Danish accent. I love it when curiosity kills the cat. When players get information that are warnings, but their curiosity pulls them in further. Now, this is just so Saxious, this next comment. Oh man, that gives me such an evil happiness that I can bring the pain to the innocent players that knows not my style. I can picture him with that look on his face, with his Danish accent, and even the way he's done the full stops, the way he's repeated the word that. Oh man, that it is so Saxious. I can hear him saying that. Shame you couldn't be on. But what I was going to say, I mean, regarding that sort of mundane sort of start, there's one adventure that I've tried to run a couple of times for Call of Cthulhu, and it's always fallen flat. I've seen it recommended by a number of people, but it's because I run more one-shot Call of Cthulhu adventures, it's failed for me every single time, because it requires a campaign feel. It requires the players to be fully invested in where they are and almost a reputation with the neighbors and the locals, whether they own the house where they're at the moment or whether they're at a friend's house or whatever. They need to have all those ties. Mr. Corbett.
Yeah, which oddly, is like there's like the second Corbett in published adventures.
Yes. I am talking about Mr. Corbett.
That one sounds like it's a real big setup.
I've never succeeded in setting it up properly, because I've always tried to run it tried to run it twice as a one shot, and it hasn't worked particularly well either time. And if it's set up properly, that could be one of the most vile and grotesque adventures out there. But I've failed.
I imagine it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with Deadlight, is that it's maybe one of those ones that really works best to insert in the middle of your campaign. Like you said, it requires sort of a campaign feel, because you could have it sort of evolve organically out of the neighbors of one of the players. Like my group would work great. They all are based out of this brownstone in San Francisco. They've got so it could be like the next house over, and it would just slowly but surely mention. You could even have them run into like Mr. Corbett could come over and ask them to water his garden while he's out for on vacation or something like that. Every so often.
I think you need to change the name, though, because almost everybody who starts playing Call of Cthulhu plays the Haunting first. And, of course, the bad guy in that is the Corbett house. It's the old Corbett is down in the cellar. And
although it also works if it's the same last name, because that's a Lovecraft thing. You hear about Whateleys and Waits and all these lineages. So maybe Mr. Corbett in the newer one is some family member descendant of old man Corbett from from The Haunting, and then you start building your mythos feel, because you're like, oh well, young Corbett's just as batshit crazy as his grandpa.
but people get, thing is though, as soon as you talk about him being a neighbor, people are going to be straight away. People are going to be like, aye, what's going on here then?
Well, I would run Mr. Well, you're right. Most people start with The Haunting, but like for me, I would, because I don't do a lot of published stuff. I would run Mr. Corbett first, and then later on, we're like, wait a minute, we got to go to this haunting house, this house that was supposedly owned by old man Corbett. Wait a minute, then they'd be suspicious when they go to The Haunting, and which doesn't do them any good, because The Haunting. The whole point of The Haunting is it's not what it seems when you get there. So I guess supposedly we should have maybe thrown out spoilers for this stream to anybody planning to run.
Oh, look, okay, I'm going to apologize now. Apologize now. Any spoilers? I'm not going to spoil any adventures that I intend to run in the Discord channel. I'll spoil everything else. Spoil absolutely. Yeah.
I was like, there's one that I love, and I'm not going to name the scenario because I don't want to spoil it. But there is a published Call of Cthulhu scenario where you go through the whole thing and there's no supernatural activity at all. It's all a scam. And I think those are great to insert in campaigns too. It's like, nope, these aren't cultists. They're just bank robbers. They just happen to steal a thing that's suspicious. They robbed a bunch of safe deposit boxes, and one of them happened to include the Great Book of whatever. But it was just bad luck.
Yeah.
And you could end that scenario in just kind of a real big, WTF kind of moment by having them like finally get to the end. They find the crooks, and then like a Byakhee swoops down out of the sky and takes the thief away into the night or something. And that's the only mythos in the entire scenario. All right, end of the scenario. You beat it. You got the thieves. Now roll for sanity.
Yes, the only sanity check of the entire scenario right at the end. Yeah, that would subvert people's expectations.
Yeah.
A favorite setting for Call of Cthulhu?
1920s, 30s. I like the pulp era, so it's a good one for me. I know you like the
1890s. Gaslight. Yes.
I've tried running it in the modern time. Ran 1.5 scenarios, and I was not up to speed on what I would need as a GM to counter modern technology. And I know there's a lot of, there's been a lot of talk about how you can counter it. And I just feel like anything you do is kind of dickish. It's like, I mean, cell signals there. Okay. That's tired and old. Well, okay. The computer breaks down,
At the start of Forget Me Not, when I was setting the characters up, I made and the scenario suggests this. I made a luck roll for each player, and the outcome of that roll determined whether or not they still had a working cell phone. So some of them couldn't find their cell phones. Some of them had broken cell phones. So they spent the adventure trying to get them fixed, or talking about getting them fixed. But what I found in that scenario with technology, and this was a nice moment, was that they were able to video what was going on at key moments on their cell phones, and they had a habit of videoing some particularly horrible things and sending these videos to each other, which was then in turn triggering sanity checks for the people watching the videos as they receive them, which just spread the horror around a lot.
Now I gotta ask, like when they were watching the horrible stuff on video, did you reduce the sanity effect? Because I like to I feel like people watching videos would not react as strongly as it being there.
No, because it demonstrated to them what was going on inside them.
Oh, okay, so yeah, yeah. I guess in that case, yeah, because that would work. In the case of my modern scenario that I ran, I ended up using the technology not against the well, I guess I did use it against them. I just used it to help build it ended up being used to build the sense of paranoia as what looked like investigating a possible werewolf sighting on a trail cam turned into why does this bumpkin farmhouse out here have like a top of the line security system and an incredible computer that no farmer should have and yeah, and then went from there. I mean, by the time the scenario was done, they were in an old Nazi bunker in the woods. So
Saxius, again, Saxius's comments. Here we go. More. Do videos really transfer the reality of what the camera captured? And when the technology is limited for capturing the true colors of the beings, what? Yeah, that's a good question. But in the instance when we had it, it certainly in the first game, it captured one of the investigators dying on the operating table, his body splitting open, and hordes of spider broodlings emerging from his body, and his body being revealed to be a shell having been consumed inside. Very physical, very visceral. And if you see that, a video of that, and know that that is your fate, that's going to wreck your sanity.
yeah, that's why I kind of said that. Well, that makes sense because I mean, if it's like, hey, bud, here's what's going to happen to you. Yeah, we've been all wondering about what's going on inside of us. Well, here, look.
Yes, yes. This is your friend. This is your friend, and yeah, this is.
That's a little different, and but yeah, the technology aspect ended up being a little tricky to play with, and still feel like I was playing Call of Cthulhu. I've heard it used really well, but I back to the original question, favorite era, the 1920s 30s era is good for me. There's enough technology to where I think the technology that exists then is halfway more frustrating than it is useful, because yes, phones are there, but not everybody has them, and it takes forever to make a phone call.
Which adds to the isolation feel.
Exactly. And if you're outside of a major metropolitan area, you're probably not going to have access to them at all. Automobiles are there. You've got you've got planes, you've got all of the modern conveniences for transportation, but they max out at about 15 miles an hour on a back road. And they don't run. You don't have the 24-hour retail cycle like you have here in the US. It's like nowadays.
Migo fly faster than 15 miles an hour.
Exactly. And so having that ability and unreliable light sources, sure, you might have a flashlight, but it's not going to last long. It's not overly bright. So yeah.
Yeah, General Nut says it didn't hurt his sanity because his was the character that died on the operating table.
Well, that helps. I mean, your sanity can only go so far, and generally not into the grave with you. And if it does, that's a whole other scenario.
Well, yeah, potentially. I do keep getting distracted from what I have these things I'm going to talk about, and just wandering off on tangents completely makes me forget. So let's see if it was something that was triggered with a comment. It probably wasn't. Lionel, no, I haven't. But reading that description, I'd probably enjoy it. I'm going to admit now, I don't watch horror films. I am an absolute wuss when it comes to watching visual effects of gruesome events. I don't like jump scares. I don't like gratuitous blood and guts on the screen, but I have absolutely no issue with them in a game or in a book. In fact, I love them in games and books. It is weird. It is weird. So a visceral X-rated horror sounds good to me. So that's something certainly worth checking out if it's a good system. I think Lionel's question here would be a better one for Elfbait when he comes back from his work. What favorite monster or baddie from movies or comic books would you like to transfer?
Oh, if the camera's off, I'm still here on the mic.
That's
I just, instead of having me sneak off the camera like some sort of Muppet, yeah. I mean, I could always do the Muppet walk and just.
Yeah. you have to multitask, don't you, when we do the stream? So
yeah.
So, what favorite monster or baddie from movies or comic books would you like to transfer over to a horror RPG scenario?
Ooh, Pumpkinhead is a good one. Pumpkinhead, if you've never seen the movie Pumpkinhead, you don't like horror movies.
No,
it is such a good blend of modern slasher horror, but only barely, and with a touch of folk horror built in there. It's like one of the earliest kind of folk horror movies, but it's an 80s movie, so it's a little lighter on the folk horror like you would get today. I mean, nowadays when you got stuff like Midsummer and stuff like that, it's like, oh my God. But Pumpkinhead is great. You got a monster that's got a mythos built in. He's a vengeful monster that's summoned by regular country backwater folk. I mean, he fits right into Lovecraft, honestly. He's kind of, I mean, his name is kind of, he has sort of a jack-o'-lantern-y look, but it's more so just because that's his sort of Ozark, Appalachian sort of horror kind of about him. But Pumpkinhead's definitely a good one.
When I was, between about 1989 and 1995, pretty much before the internet arrived, when I was living most of the time alone in bedsits or in student houses, I did do a lot of reading because there were fewer distractions, and I read a lot of Stephen King, James Herbert, Ian Banks, Brian Lumley, those sort of authors. So I've read, and now I listen to audiobooks, recording for Lovecraft stuff. So reading horror is my way of doing it. And I remember there being a very interesting take on the vampires in Brian Lumley's Necroscope series, which I think would translate beautifully to Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, there's kind of tweaky, weird viral vampires, aren't they? Kind of a little bit.
Well, they're alien vampires, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they're alien vampires, they fit the Cthulhu idea very nicely. So that, I think that would work really well with Call of Cthulhu.
Speaking of audiobook podcast stuff, there's my latest obsession has been a podcast from back in Washington. I may have mentioned this before, but it's called Camp Monsters. And it is a very folksy, great storytelling voice telling tales of American folk monsters. Everything from the Loveland Frogman, to Goatman, things like that. And it's a great podcast because he takes well-known stories and then he writes his own tale about it, and then he's just got an excellent folksy storyteller's voice. But yeah, it's called Camp Monsters. They're like season 3 or 4.
And Halakar's mentioned something about Horror Babble on YouTube.
Oh yeah, Horror Babble is great. They've got original content and they read a lot of classics from everybody.
I've just made a note of that. I just want to say hello, Omanal, who's been waiting patiently. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Other than my foot, I'm good. But whenever you want to talk about any monsters, not everything necessarily has to be monsters. And be honest, the forget me not scenario matches everything I just love, which is you're infested by something that's slowly eating you alive. I mean, which to be fair, that can apply to Alien, which is still one of my favorite monsters to use. But um, you know, whenever you start getting spiders and you start getting, anything, especially whenever they're giant spiders and because they're just plain creepy. No matter what you say about a lot of these things, even if you think they're really cool, when they're at the full size and you start looking at it, or you get something like a tarantula wasp, which paralyzes you and then inserts an egg into you. Those are that slowly eats you alive while you know it. I love
Which
them,
was the
especially.
inspiration for Alien, anyways.
Well, exactly. I mean, those are all great aspects. But if for your classical movie monsters, you got to love your vampires. Just for, but to be fair, I think they're so overdone at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that, but what I do like, and I know that we're talking about different horror, and this is one of the reasons I did like Vampire, was it's not the fact that of what you're facing so much as it is what you're becoming. And that has that mechanic that prevents you from becoming the true monster, except that you keep losing your humanity slowly, bit by bit, and the closer it comes down, the more you go, so
Yeah, and they were pretty good at managing that for just about every monster they brought into that game system because werewolves had their rage that they were working against, and the even when you got down to playing the fairy folk, they were working against banality. Like if they were just the more banal they became, the less fey they were, and they just became Bob at the video store down the corner. Uh, and the wraiths had their weird fetters and stuff, so they did a really good job with that game.
they did, but I'll be honest. Vampire's the one that really got it. The rage didn't bother me. The paradox with mage, I'm like, well, if I can alter the world, then why would I ever think it's a horror aspects? But I do love that. And then of course whenever we're talking about,
Mage is existential horror, though. That's the thing, though, because Mage is all about how there's none of what we know is real. It's basically the Matrix before there was a Matrix, because the technocracy is reinforcing reality and forcing everybody to believe what they want to believe, and that's the horror of it. So
it may seem that way, but I'm like, if I can alter things even in my favor, where I can create my own luck, to me, it just fell through. I thought it was one of those they tried doing too much of.
yeah,
Um,
it's a different
yeah,
kind of, it's more of a, like I said, it's more of a philosophical, it's existential horror rather than uh,
yeah.
the visceral horror of the other ones. But
I
I just
but
want to reply to AB here. Merp Horror Fog on the Barrow Downs. Actually, that would be quite good because in Merp, clerics or animists, as they're known, are pretty useless against undead, and undead are are horrifying in Merp. They are
yeah,
really, really, really.
Tolkien's undead they're the template for D&D undead, so
Yeah,
for
well,
old school D&D undead. So
I
proper
mean, the
ones.
ghouls that you have. What is the you know, which is a little bit different, but you want to talk about the mind control. If anyone's ever looked at the like the Haitian, um, when we're talking about what they consider,
the actual zombies.
yes, where they're stealing your soul and things like that and controlling. I enjoy those, but the question really comes down to: are the players that horrified? That's the funny thing that comes into it. Even with the Forget Me Not, is while I knew what was going on, my intellectual side's like, oh, this is so cool. I got to do this.
I mean, I'm not very up on horror villains. Either of you know Connell Cochran? What he was in,
No.
or shall I Google it?
Uh, I
Let's have
mean,
a.
I'm also horrible with names, so don't take my no as not
Oh,
knowing the character.
he's main antagonist of Halloween 3.
Okay.
He's a warlock who seeks to resurrect the pagan aspects of Halloween via the mass murder of many children.
Oh, yes, the Halloween movie that derailed the Halloween franchise, but was actually more true to its origins than everything else. Because yeah, it's a good movie, and it's very kind of actually would fit really well into a Lovecraft kind of a setting because of that blend of technology and magic.
The original Hellraiser, I think, is a good one.
The original one, and like even the second one,
Yeah.
and the Marvel Comics run, not Marvel, but it was one of their sub labels. I think it was Epic. They did they expanded this mythos really well.
I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was very well done. Because you did have that, and I think that's a perfect example of what could be used in Call of Cthulhu.
13 Ghosts, for all of its like over the topness, is also a pretty good setup for Call of Cthulhu. Have you ever seen 13 Ghosts?
Is that the one with Tony Shalhoub?
Yes, and anything with Tony Shalhoub is great. But
I like him.
Well, the set. So there's a lot of. I have to say, there's a lot of movies that the movie itself may be shit or total schlock, but the setup would make a good scenario. 13 Ghosts was at that weird, awkward time where special effects were getting good, but weren't quite there. So the interpretations of the ghosts in there are really cool. The weird mechanical house that's a giant ghost prison, that's a cool concept. I mean, especially for like a modern horror type of setting. I really dig the new trend for folk horror. I really like folk horror. I think it's a great way of establishing that isolation and limited resources and stuff.
What is that one that they were? I know that Monty Cook just did that one, which was the Old Gods of Appalachia.
Old Gods of Appalachia is a podcast. Actually, it's really good.
Well, they just did a game for it for the Kickstarter. So yeah, that's what I was,
So it's interesting because it is also done in a storyteller style. It's not a radio play. Old Gods of Appalachia or Appalachia, however you want to pronounce it, is basically a guy telling stories from the region, and they turned that into an RPG, and it's probably pretty good. I don't know what the system is. I mean, honestly, that's the sort of thing that could go into any RPG because it's just stories. But
it's the cipher system, if I remember correctly. And
I say, if we're talking horror films, Mrs. Geek could be a lot more useful to you on this stream than me. She watches quite a few horror films and quite likes jump scares and scary films.
There was one movie. I'm horrible with names. There was one that was done really well. It's a footage but not found video movie. It's actually, the whole premise is they find a roll of 35 millimeter film after this town has this mass murder streak. And they go through this film, and they realize through these stills that it wasn't just somebody going psychotic. And they go through they do it through all these interviews. Like one guy's like, yeah, the government released some kind of psychoactive agent and everybody went crazy. And as you go through the film, the pictures and the stills and stuff, and some of the radio calls and the accounts of survivors and stuff, you realize that the town in like Nevada or something like that just had zombies wander out of the hills randomly and start killing people. It was like very Romero-esque in that, you never really get a good explanation of what the zombies can do or where they came from. And that whole detachment, I'm like, that's a perfect setup for a scenario too. Is just like this whole like, hey, small town, what's going on?
You know what I always find funny is small towns are the things that they always use for being scary. Whereas, especially if you're going to use anything like swamps, there's always that aspect because there's so much there and you don't know what's there. And then you've got all these big giant bugs and alligators and other things that wander out of there to eat you.
Yeah. One of the adventures I'd like to run is there's a small town adventure in that book that I've waved earlier. It's called And Some Fell on Stony Ground, which I think is a wonderful name for a scenario. And I've read the adventure, but I think it would be far too complicated to run as an online game at the moment. But it's certainly certainly a very interesting one, and that is the sort of small town one where everyone knows everybody else, and something's happening. You got to try and work out what it is, and that's an interesting one. Anyhow, I'm derailing your conversation now.
Oh no.
No,
You
no,
guys
that's-
go ahead and chat. I gotta actually take my attention away for a moment here.
Okay, no worries at all.
I think part of it, and this is so hard with characters, and the real question starts coming down to sometimes the mechanics, which Call of Cthulhu does good with the sanity. Alien does very good with their stress mechanic. And I know that others try replicating it, is we've become so jaded that it's hard to get, as much fear. Like I tell my son, when he's worried about monsters under the bed, I said, well, son, at my age, I'm more worried about running out of toilet paper in the public bathroom or
At my age, the monsters are on my X-ray
or
or in my blood test. You know?
or the tax man. Did you pay your proper taxes? So those are. I think there's that aspect.
Yeah, I think that's why mechanical horror is important to game systems. There's a lot of you're not doing a good job if you have to have the mechanic, if you have to have a die roll or a mechanic, make it scary. I'm like, but otherwise it's not scary. That's like with horror board games, for example, why there's a doom clock. You're not expecting anybody to actually get scared. But having a stress applied to the game can substitute for that. You add stress to the imagination and the description of an RPG, and then you kind of at least dip a toe into horror, even if you can't, achieve it completely.
Well, the other aspect is because, and I don't quite want to call it metagaming, but it is metagaming when you really look at it, is because you don't want to lose, like in Call of Cthulhu sanity, you start trying to avoid things that will cause you to lose sanity. So you're getting that aspect. Where the players are going to play more based off of that than anything else. Because same thing with Vampire. You go, well, I don't want my character to lose all this humanity. It has all these negative impacts. So you're like, well, okay, I'll limit what I do. And so it does create this, like in Vampire, characters can go absolutely bonkers if they want. They're just going to drop their humanity so fast. You're like, your character's not going to last very long. And the same thing with Call of Cthulhu. Oh, I'll go face these great old ones. Okay, you're not going to last very long.
No, and you lose any sort of tension by doing that sort of thing as well. Just I've remembered the one thing I wanted to talk about. I've remembered it. I think one of the key aspects of horror. And horror gaming is something that is antithetical to a way a lot of people approach modern gaming, and it's that whole thing about player agency. In a horror game, it works better if the players have their agency stripped from them, at least periodically.
Yeah, and anybody who would complain against that is clearly not read enough horror fiction or watched horror movies, because even though you could argue, well, those are movies and those are books, of course, because they have to fit the plot. I'm like, yeah, but they're always set up to some degree to remove a lot of the characters' agency in those stories. You're isolated, your resources don't work. Even in situations where your resources may be available to you, they just aren't useful. They're not functional. Like, nobody believes you. I was just telling my wife that the other day how I'm really intrigued by the idea of, for modern horror, I think the best way to run a lot of modern horror stuff is to do the kids on bikes angle, because children are even teenagers down, are automatically isolated even when they have everything available to them, because people won't believe them. They don't take them seriously. They don't have free reign over where they can go. They're accountable to their parents and their teachers, and and so I think it's in a modern setting, it's it's a lot easier to get that set up for horror as opposed to with kids as opposed to adults.
I think the other problem is that people are forgetting fear is an emotional reaction, and it is inherently not controllable as much as you think it is. I can say this much is, and a lot of people, whenever they talk about PTSD, is what will affect you in one environment will not affect you in another.
I know full well, just having a really strong imagination. I don't believe in any of the spooks. But the other day when I binge listened a bunch of camp monsters and then tried to go to sleep, the first weird noise in my house had me getting up and doing a quick roam around the house.
and if you're walking home at night and you can cut through a short area of woodland that you've walked through many, many times during the day, or you can walk twice the distance on a well-lit street. How many of us walk that twice the distance on a well-lit street?
Oh, me, easily.
Because we know there's no monsters in that woodland.
Well, I mentioned earlier in this stream visiting my brother in the dead of winter in Maine. I got really bored when I was over there, and I got to taking walks at like midnight around this old Victorian, crusty, New England adjacent town with ice everywhere on the ground, and everything padded by snow like it is. So it's all, and I swear, all the time I would see weird shadows darting around, and
of course you do.
I would hear other sets of footprints. And it doesn't help that the library that Stephen King built and dedicated to his daughter is in that damn town. And I'll be damned if he didn't give it Amityville windows on the front of it, a red security light, and the AC unit on the roof sounded like breathing.
I'm going to bring up something, like for me, in some cases, I feel more safe in woods because that's more of what I grew up with than being in, other areas. But I knew one lady, military, she grew up around the city and she freaked out when they put her out in the woods. She said there's nothing that's ever quiet. She used to hide. She said she was terrified and would sleep under the vehicle for that very reason. In the meantime, like, it's an owl, it's this, it doesn't bother me. And I think it's that the important part of horror is removing people from the familiar or making the familiar have something that seems wrong with it. That I think is very, very important. No one has any problems walking into a street, like you're saying, into a city. But what happens when everyone has their windows shuttered and they all peek out, but they won't talk to you?
Or even the reverse, like, you're in a big major metropolitan city and you meet somebody who's just really upfront friendly with you. It's like, what is wrong with you, right?
Okay, personal experience. I was in Chicago and I like to walk barefoot. I would walk down the street barefoot, and I swear to you, I could have probably had a bloody machete and a head in my hand, and they would have made more eye contact than the fact I was walking barefoot.
Yeah, it's just it's that detachment from the expected and the norm. That I think that's really important in modern stuff, especially because everything else is so secure. Like in a city, everything you could possibly need is there. That's why I think a lot of horror in city settings in movies takes place way late at night in bad neighborhoods.
When the local bar is closed, the shops are closed.
Exactly, because otherwise you've got 8 million people on the streets. But that could be horrifying too when you're freaking out and everybody's just going past you like there's nothing's going on. And we've seen that a few times in movies too, where somebody's out there, help me, and everybody's like, "What's wrong with you?"
What do they use, like the Stepford Wives and things like that, where you're in the nice, perfect neighborhood and
Children
something
of the Corn,
yeah, exactly. Those are
or the Village.
Yes. Well, the Village wasn't so bad.
No, not Village. Village of the Damned. Excuse me.
Oh, okay.
That's what I meant, is the Village of the Damned, with all the little white-haired kids who are all super nice and creepy.
You mean Cartman and the Gingers?
I've read the plot synopsises of a lot of horror films, but never watched them. So I know the general synopsis of films like The Hills Have Eyes and things like that, and but I've never watched them.
You know what gets me about it's the music that really does it. If you can have the music playing in the background, boy, that can really ramp up the tension. You're just like, just let something bad happen. Stop keeping on the edge. Where you know something's going to happen, it doesn't. And you're just like, I just want that relief from the tension, even if it means someone gets killed or something.
Yep. I mean, some of those scenes are just fall flat without the right soundtrack.
I played in a game, and I've said before about how I react to having background sounds in a game, and it was a Dark Ages Cthulhu scenario, and the DM had it all set up really, really nicely. The room was lit with candles, and he'd got something on his television that was looping of a spooky horror scene, but it had spooky music on it, and I know it was there to set the scene, but I had to ask him to switch it off because I couldn't concentrate on what he was saying, which was and for me it was a lot better just to be in a silent room listening to him.
I remember growing up in the boonies and just some of the stuff that we ran into, and our imaginations ran pretty wild with what it could be and what it couldn't be. We drove past this house that was up on a bluff and had a glass fronted wall. Like the whole front of the house was just panes of glass, right? It's one of the richer people up on and we drove by it on the highway one night, and there were just candles everywhere up and down the steps and all over the tables, and then some lady in a white dress was walking down the stairs, because it had one of those lofts, so the front room facing the glass, there's just like one room floor to ceiling, and our brain is like, it's probably somebody's romantic evening. But and they're up above the world so high in their glass fronted house, they don't figure anybody can see them. But when it's pitch black on the highway, the country highway, driving past this, and we're like, what the hell was that? It's like, what did we just see?
And I know you have a problem with it, John, but I like it when, like Larissa's talking about, good background music is it's that escalation. The other thing is, and everyone talks about the horror, it's what's always worse is not when you see the monster, it's what you're imagining it is. And so much has to play on that aspect of the unknown. I think that's the hard part with a lot of things is, okay, I'm not that scared of bears, but I knew several of my friends that were terrified of snakes. And boy, I like almost jumping into my arms when they heard something slither through the grass. And I'm just like, calm down,
Well, yeah, I mean, walking or hiking up in the Northwest, I mean, I know there are mountain lions and bears around there. So when I'm going up through the trails and stuff, and I hear twigs snap in the tree line, I know it's more than likely a deer, but my brain is like, or it could be a mountain lion.
Big brown bear. Oh no!
I would rather face a brown bear than a mountain lion, because the mountain lion is just going to jump out and kill me. The bear may come out and size me up a bit, because bears are a little bit more cautious. Cats are murderers. So.
And you're absolutely right. You'll never hear a mountain lion. I saw one of the guys, I guess it was in California.
It's not like in the movies where they always go, wow, and they're there.
Well, he said he was looking around, and since they tend to jump down, most people don't actually look very high. And there was this, one of the guys stopped, he looked up, and there's a mountain lion just, crouched, ready to jump on him. And he's like, and he walks back, and, there was no actual confrontation, but just to suddenly see that in front of your face and realize that you'll never hear him or see him until they pounce.
Yeah, I mean, and living in the U.S., and I've lived in neighborhoods where we've had black bears in our garbage cans behind our house. They just wander out of the local wilderness park, and they're like, "Hey, this pasta looks pretty cool."
Remember, I live in a country where the largest land carnivore is the badger.
Don't you have foxes still?
Badgers are bigger than foxes.
Well,
Yeah. Not here, they're not.
Here they
So-
are. Here they are.
So the and I know you are, John, but it's a little bit different. Boy, when you start dealing with the different frogs and things, like especially in Florida, because they have the mountain. Well, they call them Florida panthers, but they're all cougars. They're all pumas. But anyway, they've got that. They've got black bears. They've got alligators. So all of a sudden you flash it. I remember people freaking out when I was coming home from college one day, and they weren't very big. They were kind of, it was only like 2 or 3 foot. But, they're like, oh, there aren't alligators just because. I said, yes, there are. I see them.
And they can be in as little as like 12 inches of water, and you won't be able to see them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, a moose
Oh,
will
yes.
kill you faster than most animals on the North American continent.
Yeah,
And
James
more readily.
You don't really. Well, from personal experience, speaking of animals, I remember dealing with a horse, and she was kind of a small horse and was really nice.
Hate
We were trying to get her out to be bred, and we pushed her out, and she reared up. But I don't care what anyone says. When a horse rears up, all of a sudden the horse goes from 5 foot at the shoulder to about 10 feet tall.
We had horses, and I hated them. One broke my mom's arm with a kick, and one sent my brother to the hospital after biting him in the gut. But the creepiest thing, one of the creepiest moments, honestly, living out on the farm is we had just moved out there from the suburbs in my early teens. So I went from suburban kid to farm kid, and our dogs were outside dogs, big dogs. I had a Newfoundland Lab cross, and I just hear him going nuts out on the farmyard, right? And I'm like, what the hell? And my parents weren't getting up, so I'm going to go out and check on the dog. So I go out there, I got my mag light, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's just looking down our driveway. Our driveway is this big, long, about an acre long drive down to the street, and he's just going off. I'm like, what are you looking at? And so then I shine my light down at the end of the driveway, and I get nothing but about 12 pairs of eye shine. There's like a pack of coyotes at the end of the driveway. And one coyote I'm not worried about, but like 12.
Well, you've got that. Well, and coyotes will sometimes pretend to be injured and have a dog chase them.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'll eat the dog.
And they were always harassing the neighbor's mule across the way. You'd hear the mule going off, and so yeah, I've been in real spooky.
Well, like you said, is also you look over. The other thing is, and I know this is the great thing, I guess, being about in North America, is just the sound of a rattlesnake.
Kidding, just the sound of an owl at the right moment in the middle of the night is a little bit creepy. The first person who wandered through the forests of North America and heard an owl was like, there are ghosts here.
We have owls in Europe.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, or a fox screaming. Good God,
mating foxes.
But speaking of which, what's really weird is whenever you're out there, and if you've ever seen the shadow of an owl just pass by, and it makes no sound.
Yeah.
And also you just see this shape go by your head. You're just like, what
I think
the
we need
hell?
Staxius to bring us back on topic.
Yeah.
But these are all ideas for horror games, aren't they?
Yeah.
You can use the natural wildlife to increase tension.
Hey, me and my friends spent the summer obsessed over a sound we heard in the woods down the road from us. It's actually enough to where I've wrote it out as like a piece of short fiction in college, but as an adult, I'm sure I heard some sort of an animal. I think back on it, I'm sure I heard an animal.
His ears must have been burning.
No, you've been wearing way too much off topic. I'm here to bring you all back in. We're here to talk about horrors and tabletop
Did Mage's
games.
Musings have enough mana to summon a Sacrius?
I'll give
I
you
think that's
credit for
about
that.
14 black mana, and
Well, I mean, you talk about that, but there's, it's always what you can't see around the corner. It's always that stuff. But the other thing is, there's certain animals, when they make sounds, they sound like someone screaming off in the distance.
you ever hear a rabbit dying?
it's just like, holy hell, what is that? And then but like you said, and what I find funny is especially people coming from the city out there, boy, just normal animals just going at it. You're just like, oh,
Yeah. Someday I'll have to tell you the story of the Howley things, but not right now.
I think we should be taking it back to tabletops. So, I mean, a lot of this, of what you've been talking about, is great because, especially because these are sounds, these are things that can be mentioned into the tabletop of games, especially for the horror, and they're brilliant, especially when, well, you start having to describe this information, and this is where whether the players actually know what's going on or not, or sometimes just giving the descriptors of things that people know what they are, but the idea will creep them out. Like I had to explain to them. I had my Curse of Strahd game, and they were exposed to the sensation of being in the presence of the Fae, which is an alien thing. And I want them to feel it is an alien thing. I wanted them to think, what is this? What is this abysmal thing that I'm feeling? So I described that they were in the presence of small childlike hands that was, reaching out and touching them. And most of the players just looked at me like, what the exactly?
Yeah, a lot of times it's just modifying the familiar too. In that Call of Cthulhu scenario I ran with the salt, when the zombies finally showed up, the first thing the players saw was their eyes glowing down the road because I described them as looking like sodium lamps. The type of illumination you get from like the street lamps and stuff like that. And because the salt was making their eyes glow, and then they're all withered and crusted in salt, and they know that the touch of the salt creatures and stuff was enough to hurt people. So yes, they were functionally in the scenario zombies, but
if you can get real animal sounds, like I found one of them from one, I don't know if it was a duck or whatever it was, or maybe
duck.
Well, you're laughing, but it sounded just like the alien, and because they take real sounds and then they modify them.
Oh yeah,
So
I mean the velociraptors from Jurassic Park were tortoises mating and dolphins and walruses and stuff.
I mean, if you can put that in your game, characters' minds, again, we're talking about that imagination, they will run rampant with that. You go, okay, this is good. And I think that's some of the things that come into it.
I'll always remember playing around with samples in my digital music class in college, and then going ahead and putting in a bunch of pigs squealing on the sample board, and then hitting it in a low key. I'm like, that's a demon. It's like when it goes from
I like bells. The slow, deep bells that you can then have, like when you toll the bells for the dead. Sometimes just playing that while the players are all sitting and talking, just amping up that sound will make them slowly turn and look at you. And then they go quiet. That's usually when it's too late. See, it's all, for me, it's about the cues. It's about building it in. It's about finding the things that I'll start out with a slow pace, slow amount, and I'll go in that direction. If I have to do horror, I do a lot of cues that I amp up over time, the more serious it becomes. I remember having doors that creaked ready whenever I had events taking place, and some players would be picking up on it and they go, I heard a door creaking, and some players would misinterpret that and thinking that it was happening in the room, and they'd look around actually looking like, where did the door open? Whereas the acute player would look at me and I'd go, and then they'll start going, is it up or down? It's like, well, it came from downstairs. And then the players are cutting in that, this is maybe a bit more than we expected. That's how I like to do the horror. I like to expect, this is best when I've got them in person. If I can get a Bluetooth, speaker to be placed at the center, having that so that everyone will be able to hear it. That's something I'd like to do. And I'll do the same for online if I can. anything to sort of draw the players in. And for those who pay attention, they will start picking up on the things that will drip in, because the devil is in the details. It's not about, seeing the scary monster, but the sounds, the build up, the ambience, having the players immersed into the grittiness of the world as they're realizing that their characters are becoming increasingly smaller and potentially even very, very fragile. When they realize that.
I guess that me just going bong wouldn't have the same effect.
Well, you can definitely do that. It's up to how you like to do it. I go through different bells and how they can be sounded, because you've got the specific, because it depends on the size. I think it was AC/DC, when they do hell spells, they usually have a very big bell at their concerts that they then hit for that, that specific sound that you can go for. So again, it's just me being maybe OTT about these things, but it's the sort of things that I like to sort of put forwards for the players.
I must say now that your words always have gravitas, but the way you are dressed at the moment, they are carrying more gravitas than usual.
Yeah, I suppose, all, pink and, salmony. And then my joke.
I mean, I agree with that. Exactly what he said. But I like drums as they get further, as they slowly get louder and louder.
Yes.
So,
especially the deep ones,
drum,
like.
Yeah.
So the comment from Roleplay the Right Way, that's even creepier now that I know that people are using recorded child sounds to lure people off of trails in real life.
I did the laughing. It was laughing child thing when I don't know if any of you played any Cthulhu Gaslight. There's a scenario set in Wales called Plantidea, and I had sort of coming from the forest at various times as the players were just traveling to this house, and every so often they just heard a in the forest followed by
Lionel Hetz's comments pretty cool here.
Well, no, wait a minute. As a father, there were two things that terrified me. One is when there was complete silence, and number two is whenever I heard he. I'm like, oh my god, what has he gotten into?
I have a story, but it's neither stream or work appropriate, involving child mischief. It's like, but yeah, kids getting into things they shouldn't, and then presenting them to your friends is not okay. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I saw Lionel's comment here, and I'd say yes. It is, if not the most important, certainly one of the most important. I mean, I think the most important skill is simply to let the players talk and let them discuss at their own pace and not hurry the game along too much, and let the players get into their situation as much as any. But yes, timing, knowing when to interrupt the players with something happening, or knowing when to drop the
the pace at which you reveal things, like in the scenario they ran where they ended up in the old bunker. I started revealing, like as they reveal, I remember one of my players just going, "This just got worse." I didn't think it could get any worse, but it's worse. He's like, if he's showing us this, what's gonna happen? Because they walk into a big chamber and there's formaldehyde filled jars, and there's what looks to be like a werewolf in mid transformation, like pulled open and pinned open on a wall. And they're like, if he's showing us this, what's the punchline?
Anyone remember seeing that? Is it in Mexico or it's in South America where they put all these little baby dolls up and hung them in trees?
Yes.
I mean, and of course, because it's a humid environment, you start getting the mold and stuff, and so now they get even creepier. based off of that.
So
Yeah. And, sometimes it's just revealing something that's innocuous and just like not even a big deal. I mean, I remember as a kid being terrified of this little door that was in the back of the walk-in closet. I mean, it was just the door to the attic space, because it was a finished attic, and then of course you have the parts of the under the eaves that are too short for anybody to go to, but you still need to get access. But there's a little door in the back of the closet. I'm like, no, that's not okay. Can we cover that up?
I had something similar when my parents used to take me when I was about 6 or 7 to swimming lessons at a local leisure centre. It would always be dusk or early evening when we were going, and there was this little hill up to the leisure centre. At the top of the hill was the road simply turned left with a line of trees either side of the road, but we always turned right into the leisure centre car park. I always had visions of what would be at the top of that road because we never went up that way, and it was just the way it just disappeared around the trees. And to this day, I just know it's another line of houses. I've been up that road millions of times.
I was terrified by a speaker cable one time on a drive with my friends. So when I was a teenager, we had access to this lakeside cabin, which in and of itself can be scary. Teenagers in lakeside cabins, right? But my brother's dad had a cabin in the area, and we had keys, and so we'd get bored, and middle of the night we'd drive up to the cabin and then spend the weekend there. We'd get up in the morning, play D&D up there all weekend. And as we're driving up there in the middle of the night, and I start hearing this tapping just outside the passenger's door of the car, underneath the floorboard, and I'm like, the hell is tapping on the bottom of the car as we're driving? And I'm thinking, at first, rationally speaking, I'm like, okay, we probably snagged a twig or whatever, right? And it's just under there. And then we went over and we went through the gravel, and it's still there, and it's like tap, 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 and it's not regular. So it wasn't like regular enough to be something that's just. And we finally got up to the cabin, and we're like, okay, you get out. I'm like, no, you get out first. He's like, no, you get out first. He's like, I'll tell you what. He's like, I'll get out on my side. So I trigger the motion tracker, and we're just like sitting there, just like, I don't know why. Just our imaginations were going nuts or whatever. But we get out there, and it turns out a speaker cable had come out, had been kicked loose from under the dash, and had snaked its way around and was hanging outside the door, clipping off the road and tapping on the bottom of the car. And it's like, we're just like, we're dumbasses. But after a long drive through tree shrouded roads and middle of the night and the boonies and
well, it's not horror related, but a car thing. When I was doing my rallying, I remember going through a stage and hearing this coming from the front of the car, and that scared me because I was doing 70 mile an hour through the forest at the time. But I had every right to be scared because about a half mile later, I went round a left-hand bend, and my front right wheel went flying off into the next field, and I was sat on 3 wheels going, "Oh, so that's what it was." But that's different anyway.
I don't know how you all feel about it, but little kids probably at like the 2 to 4 range that just seem to wander around in movies. A perfect example was the anyone remember? Dark City, and they had the little kid. Which was the alien. That to me always gets to me is because they have that little laugh. And then they have that look about them. And especially, like, I remember seeing my son one time when we took a picture of him, where the eyes reflect back in the middle of the night. And you just see this almost like ghostly little figure out in the woods. And then they suddenly disappear. Those are things that people are like, what is going on? Yeah. And you always want the players are the ones that should be developing everything. And I admit, I have to agree with Elle on this, which was the evocative descriptions are so important. The other thing is, like you were talking about, the slow burn is not getting characters killed off early in the game. Drawing it out, and I think that's
It's okay to let NPCs get killed, especially if it happens off camera.
Absolutely. Well, off camera, and they find the dead person, or
they don't find them. They're just not there when they go to check on them. It's like,
I just want to say, talking about the pacing thing, and it's apt that Legbreaker turns up at this point. In our Forget-Me-Not game at the weekend, when it was Omen Owl and Legbreaker who went to the hospital. who were both sedated in the hospital or both put under anesthetic. And I then intentionally just let the other two players take as long as they wanted doing what they were doing. And it just pretty much left Legbreaker and Omanal hanging, not really knowing what was happening. And it was a good 90 minutes, 2 hours, wasn't it? That you were just sort of listening to the interplay between Gingerbeard and Tariff as they were exploring the house without knowing.
That's because Gingerbeard and Tariff were hilarious.
Oh,
that's
fantastic.
The real reason. Yeah. Because I mean, I'll be honest. After a certain point, if they were not being funny, I would have said, "Hey, I'm just going to head off." But Gingerbeard saying, "All right, are there any mirrors?" And they're like, no. He says, "Well, thank God I don't get to see two of Tariff." Or Cliff, I think it was. That's what I thought was just him doing this, and then they're arguing about whether they have the correct cables. And I mean, It was entertaining to listen to. That was the real important part. But I think I guess Saxius has mentioned this before. I think it's you, where you say that you're suddenly going through something, and just as something bad's going to happen, you suddenly switch to another character and let them just stew and think about what's going to be happening to theirs.
Yes. I did that on purpose. I mean, I will admit, I did that. I switched away, sort of. But I thought it would be what because you basically failed the sanity check while observing something particularly disgusting. The other character was already unconscious. Yeah. I thought, well, what are the staff likely to do when someone has throws a manic fit in a hospital environment? They're going to sedate them. Especially as you'd admitted that what was coming out of Legbreaker's stomach was in your stomach as well. They're going to be curious to find out as well. So you, at that point, that you failing that sanity check pretty much condemned the pair of you.
Well, I think the other part is, talking about this is, you talk about the NPCs off screen. I think that's one of the advantages of the Alien cinematic scenarios, was that they have several different cards that come out, and it escalates on what's going on. So even if you had a plan, let's say at the beginning you were just to observe something, at the end you might be blowing up the ship. It's escalating as it's going through. But if one of the characters dies, then what happens is they hand you one of the different NPCs, and you play that character for a while until that character dies. So it helps keep it up as you slowly find out worse and worse things are going on. But it allows everyone to still be involved in the game. I think that's part of the problem with tabletop RPGs in some cases, is if it isn't engaging and entertaining, to have the players sitting by idly, is you hate to kill them off just for that reason. And I know a lot of people get mad at me for saying I don't want to kill off characters, but like, look, you're my friends. I don't want you to come over and say, okay, I'm gone. And then 3 hours, you're just sitting around probably trying to play video games or something because you have nothing else to do.
You got to try and keep the game engaging in that time. And I guess we were lucky in that sense that the interplay between Tariff and Gingerbeard was so damn good. And I was not going to interrupt that. I was just going to let it go on and on and on, because they were doing it really, really well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was laughing my head off as they were going back and forth. That was the greatest part. Is as much as we talk about, horror games, I actually find people tend to laugh more during those games than any other game.
It's dark humor as well. A lot of it, very dark humor. Larissa's got another question for us. An RPG adversary or creature that just isn't scary or intimidating enough anymore, or has been overused and is all too familiar. I'm almost tempted to say the vampire. Though I think I could use vampires in a decent manner still, but they have been normalized by modern films.
I'm glad I'm back for this one.
And Els replied to that with the werewolf. So it was Lionel. Sorry, werewolf. Lionel saying werewolves, they can be killed by firearms and silver bullets. Equally, vampires, we all know about garlic and a stake through the heart.
Yeah,
But-
I think most traditional monsters have been done to death to the where there's no mystery behind them. They've all
Yeah.
been reduced, and they the tired trope of reducing them to some sort of misunderstood science, or like vampires are now a genetic offshoot of humanity from the past. Werewolves are also a genetic offshoot of humanity from the past, or bio experiments. And,
It's
and
Johan,
zombies run as fast as a track star. Yeah.
yes, a lot of the main big monsters that we've seen in media where they've tried to reinvent them, that's where they become almost too common at that stage. Where I find if you want to do horror, especially for people who are experienced in tabletop games, you want to go for something that is not entirely known. Take the Scottish mythology of redcaps and bring them into a group and have them, have the wonderful descriptors of these small elvish creatures bathing their caps in the blood of, children, and have them sort of deal with that. Have them meet dwarves from the Norse mythology. That's not nice.
Yeah, like in one of my campaigns for D&D, I run elves as sort of the dark weirdos of the woods, not Legolas.
Yeah. If you want to bring horror in, you gotta bring back the alien, the the unknown. You gotta bring out the things where players will say, "Oh, well, I know about this. They will react in this way to this."
I think
It's
that's
like,
why
what?
folk horror has become so popular
I'm-
in cinema
is-
now.
I'm going to bring up one that you haven't mentioned, which is the witch. If you actually read some of the stories from like the 1700s and how witches terrified people far more than probably vampires or werewolves. Just that whole aspect, and I think that it's because we've become very comfortable. Whereas back in those days, starvation was real. If your milk curdled, that could be the end of you, or you were starving during the winter. I mean, that absolutely terrified people. You start looking at all the magical protections and things. They weren't as afraid of vampires. I mean, they had their fear of them, but witches, man. We hear about the Salem witch trials, but my friend lent me an archaeology book explaining some of the stuff they did, and it was most of the protections were against witches, and only did they deal with the others so much against some of the others. But I still love vampires, but that's more because they make a great villain and they're supernatural, only for the fact that I can make whatever serial killer or whatever else as a vampire, and I can make him both charming and have all the other aspects without necessarily over. I think that was the problem really with 1E, and is where they did the level drains. I wish that they had done it more like the Bram Stoker Dracula, or like they tried to do in the Curse of Strahd, for Ravenloft. I think that was a much better aspect of where you can feel. And Texas, you've talked about that. Don't look in my eyes. Don't do this. And players know there's something very, very sinister about him. And I think that's their aspect. But
on witches, Antonio, I don't know if he's still in the stream. He was sitting in the stream earlier when he ran that Cthulhu Dark scenario for us. It was based around the Salem witch trials, and I know what happened during the witch trials and everything, but it was a combination of Cthulhu Dark being very, very simple. The whole sort of late 17th century Massachusetts feel of the town, our total lack of character strength, and the way I think it was him or the scenario, but the way the whole witches were portrayed in that was very creepy. It worked very, very nicely because they came across as being very otherworldly, as a Cthulhu type scenario should portray them.
I know I've used witches in my second edition, and my players were cleverly agreeing amongst themselves that they did not want to go out and deal with them, not because of the stats, because they know them. You can go through and recite the stats and what have you. But the players also knew that because they were a coven, and when they're a coven, they get different things. And they also knew that I was bringing out magic that they had that I did not allow the players to have. And I was allowed to be a little bit more creative with that, meaning that they were going to go into a very blind fight against people, against creatures that had things that it didn't need to be in the books, because at that stage I simply went, well, you're going up against not an individual monster, you're going up against an entity, you're going up against this covenant.
Crucially, an unknown.
It was very. It was.
And
It was an unknown. Yeah.
The unknown is vital.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take. If we're all familiar with the Witcher 3 video game, you come across the crones, the covenant of witches, and you don't even get to know their names. You just get to know their titles, and they are terrifying creatures. You don't know a lot of them. You go through the entire game and you barely learn anything about them, simply because these are creatures that just they live off the legend. They don't need you to know what they truly can do. They are what they are, and they know that. And that's the thing that I like to bring out with witches, especially when it is a covenant.
They get some of their power through your fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can be creative about it. I mean, look, again, if we want to bring it into horror, and if we're going to bring it into tabletop and role-playing games, think about curses. Curses as a spell is something where you can be creative. You can suddenly start either making up a rhyme about something that has to be done, and upon somewhere in the rhyme is the solution, and within the rhyme itself is the curse, which the players then can have to go through. But it can be as strong or as weak as you want it to be, or as multi-layered, and then some of these things fall down, and it's down for the players to go through this. And the players often will become terrified. They're like, oh well, is it something I can deal with investigating? It's like, well, yes, you can just use skills and all of these things, but now you're looking at how much time do you want to put into it? Because now the big thing becomes, can you as a player use your own initiative for this, or are you sacrificing time? And if you're sacrificing time, what's the cost for that? And that's the thing that often you can always use as a sort of, not a push, but as a pressure plate against the players. The time is something that's valuable, and it's something I'm using right now in my Curse of Strahd. I'm really pushing, because we've had the dinner with Strahd. They've said their piece. Strahd has told them the gloves are off now. As the moment the sun rises, it is on. You have between now and the coming of the morning for you to prepare yourselves, and I have been hitting them hard. I've been hitting them very hard, not in terms of challenging their martial prowess. No. They will cakewalk through most of these things. I am hitting them on a psychological thing. I've been reading through the backstories that they've had. I am having letters written up and signed by the samurai's master, declaring that he's now a Ronin, because he has been a part of horrific deeds while in Ravenloft. The paladin is having a moment of crisis in her faith. Another player is fearing that the love of her character is now in danger, and someone has just learned that their old adventuring bodies have been pulled into Ravenloft under the explicit instructions that she is an enemy that has to be killed. Everyone's now having to make sacrifices that will not necessarily kill the character, but it will be killing the being that is the character, the thing that gave them purpose in their original form. And that's what I've thrown out at them. And the players are having to look now, upon their character sheets and at me and themselves and the mirror, asking themselves, what is going to happen to my character when I cross this line? Am I actually evil now?
And we come back to something we said earlier. You're taking away almost the player's choices of how and what their characters' lives are like, and putting them into a difficult situation which they don't have total control over, which then that stirs up the panic. But they can do something about it. But they are panicking because their comfort has gone.
Yes, I mind you, I have told the players from the beginning. I've told them at the middle. I gave them forewarning here that I will take off the gloves. You will be seeing what I am really like as a DM. When we get to this stage and so on. But again, these are new players. They had to be eased in. They had to learn what I'm like and so on. And I've had the fantastic phrase being thrown at me 3 times throughout this campaign. Oscar, you are evil and you are cruel, and it has made me so happy to hear those words.
Right, now, Elfmate, you're back. I'm going to have to disappear for a couple of minutes just to go to the toilet and get myself another beer. So just
Must be
yourself.
that time, because that's where I was. It's old man bladder o'clock.
Good times. Right.
Like you're talking about with the covens, I don't know if you watched the movie The Witch. You could actually see in how it did, but it didn't scare me at all. It was part of the problem, though, is rational human beings. But it's very hard to get people to go back and put that into how their characters will feel or think, because they're deeply versed in this mythology. And I think that's sometimes what people forget about is your characters may be deeply versed, but you are not. And that's the point of trying to get that in there. And sometimes you have to remove that. Like we were talking about the mechanics, you have to put those mechanics in there so it has that impact. All going over
because it's one thing. Hit points in D&D, of course, are that mechanic that generally makes people worry. In a horror game, things like sanity or stress, that mechanic that can take the control of your character away is, I think, absolutely critical for a good horror game system. Because otherwise, you have nothing but your players' choice to have them play it. I mean, it's like, in this case, because the sanity tables or the stress dice in Alien, and the resulting panic that can happen. Those are good examples, and I don't know. It's hard. I think one of the hardest things in a horror game is to get players to actually play like they're scared, not necessarily be scared. I think it's a really lofty goal to think that you have to actually scare your players.
No,
because who's actually going to do that? I mean, who's really going to do that? I mean. And if you are really scaring your players, then maybe you're not a safe person to be around.
Excuse me.
I think I think the point is to make the players uncomfortable. I mean, we can talk about things, but that's and it's, to be fair, if you're playing a horror game,
uncomfortable in the right way, though.
Yeah. I mean. If you're playing in a horror game, you pretty much know what you're getting yourself into. It's like complaining that the roller coaster went too fast or too high. You kind of know what it is when you get there. You're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but I remember. But I think there's that whole aspect of, that's what you're playing. You know that, and if you feel that you're not uncomfortable and you just can kind of speak through
goody,
it, full waste of. What's that? Are
you talking about the topic of being comfortable at the table and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have the PDF loaded already. That thing I posted into Discord?
Yes, I remember that.
I don't think everyone in chat has will have known this, but I'm just going to read this out. I did post it into Discord, and some of you will have read this, but involving the players. Before I start, this is an adventure I'm planning on running. The adventure is absolutely beautifully written, apart from certain bits, which I'm going to read to you now. And it makes me want to. I get annoyed when I read this sort of thing, but I'm still going to run the adventure because it's a well-written adventure. The adventure writer has got serious design ability. I just wish that the person who wrote it would not write things like this. This adventure is designed to run with the 5 pre-generated characters included in this module. Begin your session by having all the players introduce themselves and the keeper discussing a brief overview of the game's themes and potential trigger warnings, as is standard for any game of Call of Cthulhu. During this game, however, be sure to mention during your discussion of trigger warnings that this adventure may result in moments of inter-character conflict or death, commonly called PvP. This is not standard in Call of Cthulhu and should be discussed at this point. Not all players will be happy with participating in or being witness to PvP moments in a game, and it does impact on the entire table if it's featured. Ensure that all players are happy for this to be part of their gaming experience before using this adventure. If any player is uncertain or hesitant, use a different adventure instead. Never force interpersonal conflict on players who are not content to take part in it. I'm sorry, but if I'm running a horror game, one thing I am not going to do is warn the... I will say to the players, this might be a bit gruesome, a bit adult in places, but I'm not going to tell them things like, this might feature player versus player conflict. Are you all okay with that? I'll just simply say, this is an adult-themed adventure, and they have the choice whether to play or not. I don't want to give away aspects of the plot, aspects of the adventure, because it takes away from the tension.
I think we had the discussion previously, because that is an integral part of the campaign that you're running, but it's still worth, at least in my opinion, to give the heads up that for this you're going to need to have an iron stomach. There's going to be subjects that may be uncomfortable. You may feel uncomfortable in general by the depictions that you're going to be having, but this is where you, as a person, I'm going to look at you and say, you need to be an adult, and you need to either stand up and just take a breather, or what have you.
Yeah.
Because I've had the same conversation when I wanted to run a Witcher campaign, and I had to tell the players, we're setting it in a period of the world where you are going to be in a part of the continent where there is some serious war going on, and I will be depicting all the horrors if you go down to the region where it takes place, and this is going to be for you to decide. And that group decided that they didn't want to go anywhere near that.
So I can see where they're going with that thing you just read, Geek. I mean, it's a published piece of work. And so as a published piece of work, you don't know where in somebody's gaming career they're going to encounter it. And so including that for new players and new GMs is useful. I mean, you got more casual gamers even with Call of Cthulhu nowadays too. So I can see the merit of it. It is kind of one of those eye-rolly things for an experienced GM and an experienced player, but I can see what they're going for. Yeah.
Well, it also boils down to who is your group. Is your group going to be people who are experienced? Do they have the maturity to them? Because you can still be 30 plus and not be mature. I mean, that's just a sad part of reality. You are going to be meeting immature people up in the age, but you can also meet immature role players. And you just need to know what is your group. And if you're dealing with strangers, which in these models or modules, they have to account for the fact that sometimes you're going to have DMs who have either never run it before, or players who have never engaged in Call of Cthulhu before, that they're sitting down and going, oh boy, I have heard so many good things about this Call of Cthulhu. Let's see what this is about. It's
not horror related, but I had to have a similar conversation recently because my youngest, 19, wants me to run Cyberpunk for them and their partner. And I'm like, okay, first of all, understand that, you've played the video game, you've watched the animation, you know how brutal those are, right? I'm like, are you cool playing that? Because I'm like, I got to be honest, being your dad, I'm not exactly sure I want to put your kid, I want to run that for my kid. It's like, are you okay? Because Cyberpunk is full of a lot of objectionable material. beyond just the brutality, there's a sexuality of it. There's the commercialization, just the dehumanization. Just it's a dystopia for a reason. So again, that having that conversation up front is, I don't think, a bad thing, especially when I'm going to be running a game for my kid and then like my friend's kid. It's like, okay, I'm sorry I wrecked your kid. I didn't mean to.
For me,
It's
though,
funny.
I will say now. For me, I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. I don't know if this will work.
Oh boy.
You're getting cut edge now.
I'm going to attempt
Minimize
to share
everything.
Okay. Can you see that?
No.
No.
Oh well.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Allow slip window or screen. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. That.
Still nothing.
I see nothing.
No.
Okay,
There we go.
Oh, delay. There's delay.
Okay. See on the top right of that cover.
Waiting. Spin your wheel. There we go. Yes. For mature games. Yes.
That's enough for me.
Yeah, I would argue that that's not enough, because having been a kid and going and renting as many mature and adult videos as I could when I was younger, and also with horror, there's such a broad spectrum. Rated R, for example, encompasses a lot.
Well, I think though, when you start looking at a horror thing, you kind of know that it's gonna. Well, this is my view on it. It's going to make you uncomfortable. And some things didn't scare me near as much as others. I mean, I feel kind of embarrassed the one time that I was watching The Ring, with the creepy little girl coming out. And I was just fine until my friend called me at exactly the same moment as she was beginning to come out.
Okay.
You're like,
example. I just got done watching Hellraiser again, and I watched the new one that came out. There's not commentary on that, but I was talking with my wife. I'm like, it occurs to me that nothing Clive Barker has ever, put to screen has ever scared me. But things like The Ring or Midsommar and stuff like that, those things get to me. So they're all under the same rating. So I think a blanket rating is not always going to be the most effective way, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, Hellraiser is just so weird and so freaky and I just can't deal with that. I'm like, that's Tuesday for me. It's like,
So building a bit on your cyberpunk, but also the whole thing of like different things will scare different people. Mm-hmm. I'm starting my Shadowrun campaign. There's like myself, I've got an okay understanding of Shadowrun. I've got one player who's got a very good understanding. I've got three players two who are brand new, and then one who's a little bit lukewarm. The new players, we had to sort of talk them through what is Shadowrun, what are the things there. And the more we began explaining the commercialization, the more we began introducing them to things like BTLs, better than life, and how a lot of these things of like people are wage slaves. They are living day to day, pretty much, hand to mouth. And this is the reality. You become entrapped by this. You practically sell yourself to corporations just to have a better lifestyle. Not that you're actually improving yourself. You're just becoming more, you're selling more and more of yourself. This was something that many of my players were sitting, and I could hear the downers just bringing them down, because they were looking at their lives, they were looking at the lives in here, and many of them were going like, fuck.
Oh yeah, I stopped playing Cyberpunk for a decade plus because I'm like, this isn't imaginary anymore. Corporations do rule everything. Gang violence is rampant in the street.
But
drugs, technology out of control. It wasn't the future anymore. Now, the new version has stepped it up a bit, and also I don't know if I've just become immune to or inured to a bunch of the stuff, that plagues the world. But I'm like,
it's too late. But my point is, like, this was something that when I presented this, again, the system is not really horror. It's not really oriented around this, and it's not even the point of the entire game. But when I sat and I had to immerse them into like, what is the world? Where do you live? What is your living? Why do you go out and become a Shadowrunner? Most of them were sitting and going, wow, oh, this is hitting home hard. And they were concerned because they were afraid of some of the things that were going to come up there. And equally so, these are players who have been playing with me for 7 years. Do they know what I am like? Yes, they do. Do they know I have Excel sheets? Yes, they do. Are they terrified of the numbers because I will actually bring out economical impacts? And one of the players joked, oh, Oscar, you're going to allow me to do these things in the stock market. And I went, yes, I am, because I know what the consequences are in real life for these things. And he went, oh, what do you mean? I was like, what's going to happen when you have corporations that are allowed to send out assassins and you are tanking their stocks? Oh dear. That's right.
I do want to come to Halakar's comment. Just interrupt you a little bit. Halakar's comment out. I am intrigued now as to what happened to John Alden Jr. If you could just let us know, Halakar, if it's not too depressing. But what became of poor John Alden Jr.? I am intrigued to find out. But yeah, I've never played any cyberpunky games, but I will say that I did make a character at the weekend for a planned Blades in the Dark game we've got coming up, and I'm quite intrigued by the fact that we're playing bad guys, and I fully intend to. I don't know whether they're going to let it happen, but I fully intend to drag in a few sort of fairly horrific elements with my character, because I've made.
How familiar are you with Blades in the Dark?
I'm not familiar at all, and the character I've made is a gentleman assassin, a former gangster with standards, but he's going to be very well spoken, very organized, and very threatening.
Just understand it has lots of ghosts, and there's a lot of things in the background that go on. It's
good.
There's some weird things that go on with Blades in the Dark. I do think like Saxis is talking about there. My view on Shadowrun is, okay, I have pretty much given up on the rest of the world, and it's all for me now. And it's funny because I find it less dystopian knowing that you're freed from that than when you're actually a wage slave. As a wage slave, you're like, oh, okay, it's a Shadowrun. You're like, all right, you send assassins for me. That's fine. We can play this game.
Yeah, well, again, it depends on what, again, the views are of it. So, again, it's because I know these players, at least this player in specifics, he will have fun trying to break things, and I am not the kind of DM that sits back and go, oh, okay, well, I wasn't prepared for that. I usually give some form of response from the world, and I have negative player traits as a player, because I have taken other DMs aside and gone, what are you doing? They have done this, this, and this. You should be reacting in this and this and this way. But as I said, that these are negative traits that I have as a player. So
No, now don't get me wrong. I think that there should always be that, and I still think, one of the worst things that you can do is, if you can get players really invested, is to watch things slowly turn to ash in their mouths as as these things come back to bite them. But I think that's one of the things that really helps with like Vampire the Masquerade. These things do come back. Your actions do matter. And not only are you losing your sanity, not only are you losing humanity, now you're so deep and down that there's no way to claw it back. You are not the naive, young, starry-eyed vampire that when you began.
Well, yes, sir. Go on.
No, I think that's important for all of that. I was just going through my Alien starter set and looking at the agendas, for they have different ones. Like every character gets an agenda. And the first
It's only in the cinematic though, isn't it?
It is in the cinematic, but that's the point of why I like the cinematic, because otherwise the players can make their own, because you're getting into full campaign. But in the cinematic, you start off with like, oh, I'm bored. Figure out something that's break the monotony. That's what it literally says. And then the second one says, oh, go find some drugs from the go find some stimulants. You're like, oh, okay, so someone wants some drugs. And by the end, it's like kill anything that's your enemy. Because it goes through those different acts, it really does ramp it up from being, from here to it. The same thing happens in the movies. You don't kill off all the characters at the beginning. You wait until the very end, and then that's when everyone's at each other's throats, or at least half of the players are at each other's throats. The other half are trying to make sure they get people out. And who do you trust? I like that. Is the horror really the monster, or is it the people around you in certain cases?
Yeah, going back to that thing I read from that adventure about the player versus player. For me, when sanity is breaking in a game of Call of Cthulhu, player versus player is something that's happened, or in the majority of adventures that I've run. The first group that I ran through Forget Me Not, the two of the characters ended up having a fist fight in the company of the bad guy, because they're one of the sanity broke, and he swung at the other character. He had the bout of insanity, which said you just go violent to everything around you, and he swung at the other player character and broke his jaw right in the middle of combat. And that was a key turning point. And for me, Call of Cthulhu has always had those sort of the potential for that to happen. So to be warning against player versus player in Call of Cthulhu does feel weird. Part of horror is the player. At some point, the characters are meant to be at each other's throats.
Well, the other point is,
but is it understood though that's part of the game? Though?
Probably, but yeah.
I think that's part of the. That's why I don't see this so much in the Alien, is because you kind of know, because you already have an established. But I think the problem with Cthulhu in some cases is a lot of people have not read the books, and you can't to really get into some of it. And I've always enjoyed his descriptions. That's one of the part I really like about Lovecraft.
To be fair, Lovecraft didn't write very many stories that were consistent with the Call of Cthulhu RPG anyways. So, I mean, there's literally like 2 pieces of work that he wrote that are really line up with the concept of an RPG.
Well, no, I meant just the description, just
you're talking about like what to expect, like reading his books and his stories. I don't think would give you an idea necessarily to expect PvP. Yeah.
No, well, here's the thing though, is you can't trust anyone, and sometimes that includes yourself. And I think that's an important part to any horror game, is there should be a sense of distrust. You should be meant to feel uncomfortable. Otherwise, and to be fair, if you're putting it out as a horror game, there's the implicit part that there are going to be things that are uncomfortable that are going to turn you off. And I don't, now some of it is knowing your players. And I guess some of it comes down to they're assuming that you're playing with completely random people. But if that's the case, then why don't, instead of putting the adventure out there, it's just simply say, I don't know. I find it different. Normally I hate PvP, but it's a one shot. And if it's a one shot, I'm okay with that. It's because it doesn't destroy the game. In this case, I want to put it in quotes, enhances the game, because it sets up that paranoia.
All right, so devil's advocate here real quick though. RPGs as a whole are generally touted and really promoted as a collaborative experience. Where a group of people play together to achieve a common goal. That is at the core of the hobby as a whole. That said, there's nuance there. But if people are coming into a game, the concept of actually of PvP in an RPG may be way off from what they're thinking, that they're going to get.
I'm gonna flip that out on you, which is, I agree it's a collaborative experience. The collaborative experience is to have a sense of horror and discomfort whenever you're playing a horror game. Now, I might get kind of mad if we're going to be playing a pulp game, And I'm like, hey, that's not what this is part of. You know, we're supposed to be heroic adventurers. But in Call of Cthulhu, I mean, and I think even that's describing Call of Cthulhu is you're slowly descending into madness, and you probably won't survive. that's what it comes down to. I think that.
Again, I can watch teenagers die in the woods on screen all day and not be fazed by it. But there are other horror movies that are far less gruesome and far less horrific that get to me way more. So I think it's, I can't see a problem with spelling it out up front. Yes, it does tip the hat to the game, but it's just listing a possibility and it doesn't say how it's going to happen. You know.
I don't know.
Have any of you played Delta Green? Lionel's asking. I haven't yet. It's something that I would have done had I gone to this year's Games Expo. I didn't go. But it's
I haven't played it. No, I even know people wrote on it.
I own one of the books, and I love that book because it has a picture that I have taken several times, where someone has taken the blood of an eldritch being and then put it under a microscope, and it's just horrifying to look at. When you have the blood cells having eyes looking back at you. Oh heavens, that's a picture I've sent out several times to players and explained to them. Yes, so you see the blood cells going by, they stop, they turn, and eyes look back at you. It's like, excuse me, what looks back at me? That's right, and here's a visual for you. Oh my god. And I always send that in private. And I tell them not to show it to anyone. Just for them to have that little bit of imagery in their heads so that they can walk away from that game knowing that they've seen some shit.
Here's a little, just a bit of a diversion. One of the questions I was thinking about, and it's good that Saxius is now here for this. One of the things that made the Cthulhu Dark game gripping for me was the fact that Antonio, who was running it, English wasn't his first language. Italian is. So he's got a slightly... His English is good, but there's a very definite accent to it. And some of the words come out slightly oddly, which when he's running a horror game, enhances the feel, the oddness. Now, I'm going to say now that with your Danish accent, I think running in a horror game run by you would have a lot more impact than in a horror game run by me, Elfbait, or Omanal, because I think it would add that sort of difference to the descriptions.
Well, it's like, get a bunch of Americans around a table with somebody with an English accent, and suddenly, everything's exotic.
Yeah.
You're the bad guys in every movie. So
doesn't that help the atmosphere though? Does that?
Yes, it does, because especially anybody who grew up in the Hammer era.
I mean, I can say as much for playing the game with you as I think. Now, of course, anyone who's going through there never thinks they have an accent, but the reality of it is that we all have different accents. Your accent, I think, helps a lot for it. Though I do have to laugh if you ever use the Southern accent when we're up in Michigan. That's what I have to laugh at for that.
I end up with Brooklyn accents all over the country when I'm running. So,
hang on, during the game, you told me I'd got a perfect Wisconsin accent.
No. I didn't say you had a perfect Wisconsin. I said Wisconsin's like don't. It's like Max whenever he goes, "Don't you know?" You have to have the it's completely unique.
Oh yeah,
Michigan. Yeah, exactly.
Someone complimented me on me having an accent from the. It sounded like I was from Wisconsin or something like that. But while I was trying to play the part of the receptionist at the hospital.
No, I was making fun of you because you should have and I said it sounds like you're from the South more, and you said,
"Oh, fair enough." Well. I completely misread that.
Talking about the accents and the atmosphere it can bring in, I mean, don't know. it's rarely been a question I've asked to my gaming groups. But it is something that I find that at times, because of the Duolingo barrier, whenever I find that I don't have the immediate word, I instead just jump into prompts or descriptives instead, which that might be one of the helping things. It might be the accent just bringing out something exotic to the whole thing, especially if it is that you've only grown up with Brits or American dialects your entire life. Then suddenly there's something different to it, then yes, that can definitely do it. I often try to put any form of credit towards my personal, maybe even my family's desire to always have a good story or a good show to things. Like it's a big thing in my family, at least if you ask my wife, and her outsider looking in whenever she deals with my family. It's like there's always someone that has that show that needs to be done. There's always someone that needs to say something. There's always a speech or something for entertaining that's going on, and that's from my family, at least, that seems to be the thing. Which go on.
I'm going to bring this out because I can tell a little bit. English is not your native language. I don't think that you grew up dual. You didn't grow up dual, did you?
I'm Danish, so I grew up in Denmark.
Well, I know you're Danish, but I mean, like, I've had friends where like the one parent was an American and another parent was German, and so they flip back and forth seamlessly. But what I'm saying is, I know for the people that where it's not their inherently native language, they take a little bit longer to say things. And by you putting in pauses, it has much more effect than when I talk, because I talk fairly fast. And so I move very quickly. Whereas everything you say, it has a certain weight behind it because you have to think of the proper word.
You're making it sound like I've got authority behind everything I'm saying, and that's simply not true. I'm a simple human being who you actually think has any power because you allow me to sit behind a screen and roll dice. It's all in the imagination.
No. But I'm saying, but you have the pacing that does that.
Right. All right.
And
I'm with
that's
you.
what I'm saying. It's for myself, as I know I talk very quickly, but if I would slow down a lot more and think, it comes off much more authoritative, and that's where you come off as. And I think that makes the game a lot more immersive for that aspect. So that's why you always bring gravitas to the discussion, whether you realize or not. And of course, us hearing ye old Geek in his British accent, he feels like there's more gravitas there as well.
Well, that's we can thank the Star Wars movies for that. With all the Imperials being, classically trained British actors.
Use the Force, Luke.
Except for him, he's American.
Alec Guinness wasn't American.
Well, you sounded like Darth Vader, so
Yeah,
I was that was Alec Guinness.
I know.
The Force, Luke.
Use the Force, Luke.
I can already see Mage is trying to push for me being voted in for running a horror game now. Oh dear.
No, I think you're good at it. I do think the accent would help because it certainly helped when Antonio was winning the game for us. And as you say, because he spoke more slowly, more deliberately, and the accent adds an oddness to the descriptions, which really does bring out the descriptions and brings out the scenario.
All right.
but I think that's true for each of us. Is because we're hearing not only that, is it also brings that otherness because we're used to hearing our own accent, so we take it kind of for granted, and then you get someone else that's coming in, you're like, oh.
I do want to say that the wonderful thing about being a Duolingo or like having multiple languages, especially if you can speak a language that's got a different alphabet altogether, you can bring out some wonderful sounds that most people wouldn't understand. So A, Ö, and O, those are specific vowels that are a part of the Danish language. But then if I suddenly switch over to Danish, så bliver det meget, meget anderledes, fordi nu snakker jeg på en meget anderledes form, og jeg kan jo snakke omkring øer og fugle og det ene og det andet, men der er ikke nogen, der forstår det. And that's something, if I need to bring out, the
Go back
oddness.
to Mordor with your black speech.
Yeah. Exactly. But the point is, like I can bring out, like, that's something, especially for horror, where something like, what do I hear? Well, you hear blah 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 blah. I'll just put on the Swedish Chef, and then there you go.
Well, you know what's funny is when Zach speaks his native language, he sounds less authoritative than when he speaks English.
I know,
because it rolls off your tongue very quickly. That's what I'm saying is because I know that you're mentally translating, back and forth. When you're doing English, you have to slow down a little bit.
I have to say, I remember having fun with my kids, telling them, what the mighty Thor would actually sound like. And they're like, and then I had them listening to some, I can't remember which Scandinavian language exactly. I'm like, yeah, are you going to take him seriously no matter?
Yeah. Yeah, but that's also why whenever Doof comes around, since he is Swedish and I am Danish, there is just the immediate, clash.
I love the videos where they take a word and then have like an Italian say it, and a French person say it, and then a German at the end.
Yeah.
I was going to say to Hallowe'en, well, hello, Saginaw General Hospital, reception speaking. How may I help you?
I still think Geek needs to go listen to if you ever watched the movie Fargo.
God.
Well, I mean, but that's the Minnesota accent a lot of times, and it's funny to hear that.
I will say my trip to Maine helped me with like New England horror, because ask directions from anybody in Maine, and they're going to give you directions that are based on local history. And it's like, and you got to go down there. The old Flanders place. You're gonna take a left there. Now the Flanders place burned down 3 years ago, and you go back down to where that old dog used to lay out on the side of the road. But he doesn't do that anymore because,
leave your camera. Your camera was wonderfully wonky there, Elfbait.
Actually, you know what? Elfbait mentions that, but I can say this much because I went out with the farmer who's going to be plowing my land, and he gave me like the whole history of like every farm we were driving by, and over here, and this goes back, since 80 years ago. Where this, I mean, it's not just. Yeah, you're right. You don't just get the direction; you get the whole history as you're trying to find out where you're supposed to be going.
Yeah, it's and of course, living in the Midwest, I'm really having to get used to random people wanting to talk forever. It's like, I don't know who you are, person at the grocery store who just happened to notice that I was buying the same brand of hot dogs as they are. It's like, of course, I also come from Seattle, and we're famous for having the Seattle freeze, where
I work in a shop, and I'm quite familiar with people who are very lonely coming in and thinking that the shopkeeper really wants to talk to them and entertain them for 2 hours when they spend £3 in the shop.
Now, on the flip side, when I found out that the 2 termite guys that came to treat the termites at my house were both gaming nerds, or more so, they saw my gaming stuff in the basement. They're like, "You play D&D?" And then, like, my wife's like, "You need to go now." It's like, you just leave, or you're not going to get out of here on time.
Yeah,
I had the movers when I moved into my current house. I had one of the guys sort of lean over and was like, "That's a really nice gaming PC you have there." I'm like, "Thanks. So what's your gaming tag?" With thankfully my wife was nowhere near around, so yeah.
When I started with the company I work for, we had to go on field ride-alongs, and the guy they put me with was a D&D player. We didn't talk work at all for the 10 hours we were in the truck together.
No. My colleague that I sit next to, he's into Warhammer, so sometimes, if we just have a small diversion over into Warhammer, and then suddenly 20 minutes is gone, it's like, oh,
well, clearly
right.
You guys have good jobs. If you could afford Warhammer. No.
It's like me and my boss with music. If we get onto the subject of music, nothing's
Yeah,
going to be
you
done.
go.
Yeah,
Exactly. But bringing that back to horror, it is horrible that time flies when you have discussions like that.
The termite guy went into the house and was never seen again.
Speaking.
Roll for initiative.
Well, no, you're talking about that. Is if anyone's read David Goggins on his experience before he became a Navy SEAL about the falling of cockroaches all over his body and just pouring down, and he just like, oh man, especially whenever you can start doing that little the talk about like the legs moving across your body and stuff, and I think that it's the tactile experiences, and the other part is I'm going to bring up a little bit different. So they always say that smells evoke the most, are associated the most with memory. So whenever you do a horror, what smells do you like to throw in there?
Rotting corpses. I'm boring.
I always like to throw in odors that are not consistent with what they're seeing, or like line up with things that are wrong. Like for going back to the salt thing again, like when the zombies were shambling through, I described them smelling very much like beef jerky because they were all withered, dried out, salted human flesh. I'm like a combination of swamp and beef jerky.
What, so things that we like to put into horror games to make it horrible?
Well, like the sound, the smells. He asked specifically, like what kind of smell.
Sulfur. Oh, that's that distinct smell of wood that has burned. See, it's the primal thing for me. Fire. Okay, when you can go for something that is distinct, but most people will associate it with something bad, especially because again we know fire is bad. So if I like to bring that smell in, and I've done it with magic, and I've done it with like the smell of ozone. There's a smell of burning, like wood burns, things that's been redistributed in a different form of energy.
Just mention the smell of burnt hair. Ugh.
I like mildew and rot. Rotten wood.
I see. We've located the Nurgle worshipper.
But you've got that, and then of course the smell of chlorine whenever you're going in certain places, and the smell of antiseptics. Just
now, General Nut and everyone else who played in Forget Me Not, I do hope that whenever you now hear The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, you'll remember the adventure. You gotta know when to hold 'em. Yes.
That would just make me think of my grandpa.
Everyone who played in those scenarios heard me sing Kenny Rogers. It was not good. We are going to be bringing the stream to a close in about 15 minutes. So I do want to shill for playing games in Discord, which we will be doing again, and hopefully this Sunday. And I'll be running an adventure from that Nameless Horrors book on my Discord between 6 and 10 p.m. on Sunday. Everyone's welcome to join in if you're free, and I'm not going to stream it online because there wasn't the taking the take up that I hoped. But I am going to show you now the adventures I do have in my possession that I could feasibly run in Discord in the very, very near future. I mean, if you want to play, and it's up to you lot what you want to play. If you want to play in the time of the French Revolution, we have Reign of Terror. I've already run Deadlight for lots of people, but I'm very much a fan of that one. We can run that again. And I have this.
oh,
I have this. I have I'm just showing off my collection now. I have that.
He's just bragging.
Yeah, I have that. Which might be with the initials there. Yog. There we go. Yog Geek. That could be that could be a suitable one. If you're beginners, there you go. We could play some of those. I've never played those. I do have that classic.
I think I have that one. Yeah.
And there's lots of good ones in that one. There's lots and lots of good ones in that one. Plus, one I've already showed you, the things we leave behind. There's one in that called Ladybug, which is particularly unpleasant, which is one I will look forward to running at some point in the very near future. So Ladybug is certainly a possibility. But that's not the one I'm going to be running on Sunday. Anyway, back to the discussion here. Yes, it'd be good to see you, General Nut, again. Yes, join in. But you are playing in my MERP game on Saturday, so you might be bored of me by then.
Or he might be addicted to your gaming style. It's quite simple. You give them a wonderful good shot at the beginning, and you starve them, and then they come back for more, and you give them another good shot, and then they come back for more, and you just keep on drugging them up, and before you know it, you've got players that will play with you exclusively.
There are adventures that come in that as well, which are very good. And yes, I do have that. I don't intend to run it in the very near future because I would need a very committed group who are willing to play for a very long time to do that one. But
is that the one where you get a shipping manifest at the beginning?
Yes.
I see.
Saxus is all in.
Aye, you're booked. How many weeks? How many months?
He's even got his stamp. He's just like, boom. Yeah.
Plus, of course, you are feeling incredibly committed.
Oh, God.
It's the same, I don't think I could ever play that one for the same reason I'll never actually finish reading the Song of Ice and Fire series. I need to have some time for the rest of my life.
I thought it's because George R.R. Martin will never finish the series.
Well, there's that too, but I was trying not to be inflammatory.
At this point, I don't think it's inflammatory. George, it's taking you over 10 years, and you're in your 60s, or was he 70? I mean,
well, I have to kind of agree with one of the statements that was made that has been attributed to him. Don't take my word for it, but he basically has said, I kind of gave up because no matter what I write, nobody's going to be happy with it.
well,
Because everybody's got their expectations, and
that happens when you write a global success, though, isn't it? It's
well, yeah, but the thing is, there's been so much theory crafting, and then now you've got that split between the show fans and the book fans, and I don't envy that position. I mean, I'm sure something will get published posthumously. Which
I'm going to bring it this way. He doesn't have a good editor because he's too successful to really keep him on task. Because he's brought out, what is it, like 3 books that don't involve his main series in that setting, and then like wild cards. I think he's just, he doesn't want to finish. There's a certain point where you just get burned out. We've all done that with our campaigns. Like, okay, we just want to stop it now.
Yeah, and knowing that he's a gamer, I that's got to be a part of. He's like, but I don't want to run this campaign anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to play Cyberpunk.
Oh man, yeah, that's a good one.
So I hadn't seen this comment. I've just seen it now.
I remember seeing that book that Halagar showed. That was unique.
Yes.
Anyway, we've got what, 5 minutes left until the 3 minutes.
Yes,
so should we bring out our closing thoughts on horror and how to bring it into tabletop games now that you have been allowed to pedander off the rails?
Go on then. Oh, you go first then, Saxis. You go first.
All right. Horror in tabletops. It requires investment from everyone, players and DMs, and for bringing the true horror and discomfort to life. It is the small things in my eyes that really brings out the devil, brings out the terror, and makes things tense. It doesn't need to be gory. It doesn't need to have jump scares. It doesn't need to happen now. Like a good recipe, sometimes you just need to let things simmer in a slow cook. And then eventually it will come to that delicious point where the players will feel concern. And that's all through the collaborations of the small details that will all build up to a mountain.
Yeah, I would say honestly, if you're running horror, think as much about what you're not putting in front of your players or what you're intentionally leaving out. Don't be afraid to ration their exposure to things. Kind of lining up with what Saxus was saying as far as timing, but also just it's okay to not resolve stories too, especially in like Call of Cthulhu. I think a lot of players get through the scenarios wondering if they beat it and or if they actually did we fix it. I'm like, well, that's kind of part of the horror. It's like, okay, you got out of there with your life and you burnt down the building, but is the thing in the basement actually dead, and are you going to go back and make sure?
That's certainly true if you're running a campaign. I mean, if it's a one shot, and I'm happy to clear up the details at the end. But
oh yeah, I mean, you can always telegraph that in a newspaper article. Blah 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 was the fire chief said that da 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 da. But yeah,
I'm going to say this much. One is game systems matter, but so much of it really is allow the process to happen. Don't try forcing it. Don't try rushing it. Enjoy it for what it is. Understand that your characters are probably going to die, and it's. I think and lean into it is part of it. Like you were talking with Strahd, where he charms the character. Lean into that aspect. Don't be like, oh, I'm mad because I don't have this. No, lean into that when you lose control. Let the mechanics do that, but then you also play that up as well, and everyone's going to enjoy that more. And then the other thing is, you will probably laugh more during horror games just to break the tension than you will in your normal game, with the exception of maybe Paranoia, because it's just the way it is. You're going to do that to break the tension. You're going to do it to have fun, but don't try derailing everything to have humor. It comes about naturally.
Okay, and then I'm going to summarize. I'm probably a little bit more mechanical to start with. I'm going to say, yes, system matters. Pick a system which doesn't have complex mechanics, because every time the mechanics get in the way, you break any sense of atmosphere, any sense of tension. So go with a system that you can run very smoothly, and one that is very flexible, and one where easy to resolve success and failure in terms of the way you describe things quickly, a spur of the moment. Be prepared to improvise heavily. You've got to be confident as a DM. You've got to be willing to go well and truly off the rails at times. We've talked about the pacing. Patience is vital for everyone in the group, including the DM. You've got to let things happen, and the players have got to let things develop. And if you do that, you bring out the role playing, you encourage the role playing, you encourage the players to get into the characters, which is good because it means they invest themselves in their characters' fates, and that makes things feel so much more real. And I'm going to say a key here for me is what Andrew says here, and his follow-up statement. The pictures are better on radio. Imagination is much more effective than graphic details. Yes. Theatre of the mind works beautifully. Online, when you've got you're in your headphones, you've got the outside world muffled, and you're focusing on what is going on. You're listening. You're concentrating. everything just sort of slows down, becomes more intense, more focused, and that's what I've got to say, basically. I think we've covered pretty much everything that needs to be covered. I think it's been very productive. I think if any wannabe horror GM watches this stream, they'll come away with positive tips on how to run a horror game. I think we've done a damn good job, chaps.
Yeah. Remember, Call of Cthulhu is not just about killing characters and insanity.
It's not. It's a wonderfully flexible system which has got some amazing adventures. Yes, they can be linear, but the outcomes are very rarely prescribed, and the solutions are things that you will have to work out as a player, as well as using your character skills. And character skills tend to be pretty weak in it, and there's a lot of failure, and the failure makes the game so much more interesting.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Failure is fun.
It is. As always, at this point in the stream, yes, we've just hit midnight. And as Halakar says, it's not that you die and go insane, it's how you die and go insane. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you to Elfbait, Sexius, and Omanal for joining me on the stream. Thank you for everybody who's been involved in chat. It's been really, really good tonight. Lots and lots of people getting involved. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know if I'll be streaming on Friday with the Fighting Fantasy one, because this stream has taken me over my limit. It depends what time on Friday that my allowable hours for streaming reset back to 0. Because I've gone over my 20 hours on this stream. If it resets before 9 o'clock on Friday night, then we'll be doing a Fighting Fantasy one. If it doesn't, then we're going to have to postpone it this week, unless I want to drop $25 on a month's subscription on StreamYard, which is, to be honest, that's excessive. I pay $5 or $6 a month for Incarnate, which is great, but $25 for StreamYard, it's too much for what you get, I'm afraid. Certainly a channel my size. But I did look into it. I did think about it because I do want to upgrade it. But if it had been $10, I'd have done it at a drop of a hat. But $25, which is £20 in my money, that's a Call of Cthulhu book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So anyhow, thank you, everybody. I'm going to close the stream now. It's been very, very enjoyable once again.
Have a good night.
Hey.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.